Hi, Peter James Stephen here. Synthspiration. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. I'm very lucky to have an older brother who's 7 years my senior. So I got to hear music that my friends at school hadn't even dreamed about. Now, he was listening to the Beatles, Yes, 10cc, XTC, the original Genesis, the original lineup of Ultravox, and all sorts of things. And they are real, what I call influences. I think influences and inspirations are two different things. I think you can have influences all the time, no matter what you hear, a new piece of music here or a new piece of music there. Influences for me were Japan, courtesy of my brother, OMD, Human League, Duran Duran, I'm a lifelong fan of theirs, Depeche Mode, New Order, China Crisis, Talk Talk, and they're influences. But inspiration, now that's more powerful. So a real big influence for me was the Human League, and my brother brought back this album on the vinyl. This is obviously my CD version, Travelogue, and it's exceptional. It really is good. I think a standout track for me would be Gordon's Gin. And then this happened. Again, a real influence. Especially the follow-up album that Martin Rushent did, which was Love and Dancing, which was just incredible. But for me, to be really inspired to think, I can do this, I can get off my arse and think, this is different. The first real inspiration from me was the first single I bought, which was Happy Talk by Captain Sensible of The Damned. Totally different to what he was doing with The Damned. Brilliant song, but the B-side had a track called I Can't Stand It. And before that started playing, you had this announcer say, and now Captain Sensible will play the Oberheim synthesizer. And that blew me away. That was just an incredible, organic sort of sound. It wasn't like the early Human League stuff that I'd been listening to with lots of sequences and stuff like that. This seemed natural. This was amazing. And to follow that, my brother passed me another album that he was listening to, Japan, in the shape of this, Gentlemen Take Polaroids. And again, this album was a real inspiration because, again, it was an organic type of sound. It wasn't the, the sequencing and the drum machine. It just made the synthesizer, to me, feel like a real instrument. And I think this had a Prophet Rev 2 literally dueling with an OBX, probably A. And that, to me, the standout track for this, you've got Gentlemen Take Polaroids, obviously, and Taking Islands in Africa. Now, you've got to go and listen to it because it is absolutely amazing to think that this was recorded in 1980. So that was a real inspiration, and that's what really got me started with wanting to use synthesizers in my music. My second inspiration, which really got me started, was listening to Thomas Dolby and his first album, The Golden Age of Wireless. Standout track for me was Flying North. And again, it suddenly was a man who was doing this himself. Yes, he got session players in when he wanted to record and things, but he was doing this himself in his bedroom. And I thought, I can do this. And when he followed up with this album, which was The Flat Earth, then everything sort of clicked into place for me. This was just something I could do. Standout track. Well, there's lots of standout tracks, but if you take Screen Kiss, that is, I've actually had the pleasure of talking to Thomas Dolby about this, and Screen Kiss is his favourite track from this album, and it's brilliant. You need to listen to it, and that's what got me started. This was a chap that could do it himself, and it made me want to do it myself, and I did. And by this time, I was in my band in 1985, and I was doing my own recording. So yeah, real inspiration, Thomas Dolby. And I followed him throughout his career, even when he brought out quirky records like this. They're just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I've kind of followed Thomas Dolby's career, even with his tech, I found a niche market with my Vampire Rack. He found a global market with his polyphonic ringtones. So it's been a great journey, and I still follow, and he is an inspiration to me more than anyone, I would say. So my third inspiration was listening to the radio. I used to work a Saturday job in a music shop in Chippenham called Campbell and Wells, and they had the radio on one afternoon, and a song came on, and it blew me away because it was totally different. It was 1985, and the song was West End Girls, the Stephen Hague version of the Pet Shop Boys, and wow, I needed to know how they made that sound, and that started my emulator journey. And within a year, I had an Ensoniq Mirage. And then by 1989, I had my emulator too. And the rest is history. My sampling obsession carried on from there. And I'm still doing it. So great.
So my Synthspiration began here with this blue box, which is to say it all began with Doctor Who. In my early teens, I barely knew the difference between an organ and a synthesizer. I'd already been a big fan of Doctor Who here in the States, but the Great Awakening came for me in 1980, and that's when a friend in the UK started sending me audio cassette tapes of the new Doctor Who stories shortly after they aired, but long before they made it to video here. That's also the year that the BBC Radiophonic Workshop came back to the series. So as I was listening to Doctor Who, what I heard more than anything else were the new electronic and synth-heavy theme and scores by composers like Peter Howe and Paddy Kingsland. And that quickly grew to finding out more about the workshop itself, and pioneers such as Delia Derbyshire and Brian Hodgson. And then I discovered Jean-Michel Jarre and Vangelis and John Carpenter, and suddenly I found the music of Pink Floyd and Genesis a lot more interesting. Now, I wouldn't get my own first synthesizer, a Casio CZ101 that I still have back here, until a few years later. And it was later still that I would even learn that my beloved new Doctor Who theme was performed by Peter Howe on synths such as the Yamaha CS80, the ARPA Odyssey, and the Roland Jupiter 4. The peak of all this was a few years back when, as director of marketing at Cherry Audio, I got to virtually meet and interview the same Peter Howe, and that's what I call coming full circle, which itself is also a Doctor Who pun.
Hello, Pro Synth Network. I'm Justin Havu, and this is my Synthspiration. I've always had a love for music throughout my whole life. I've always gravitated towards things with keys. I remember getting a Yamaha PSS 130 as like my very first keyboard, and I really started getting serious into playing around age 7 when I first heard Elton John's Greatest Hits. And pretty soon I learned how to kind of play my way through that whole album. That's what got me into playing, but what got me into synthesizers was this album, Toto 4. I remember the first time hearing Rosanna on another compilation that I had. Can't remember which one it was, but as soon as it got to the keyboard solo, first of all, the whole song just kind of blew my mind. Like, beautiful arrangement, amazing chorus, amazing hooks, musicianship, like everything. Like, Toto is probably my number one favorite band. I've loved pretty much everything they've ever put out. But as soon as I heard that keyboard solo for Rosanna, my mind was going, how did they get those sounds? And then when I first got Toto 4 and listened through the whole album and reading the liner notes, there's a section on some of the instruments that they used on that album. The Yamaha CS80, the GS1 on Africa, Polyfusion Modular Synth, and just to name a couple of them. But it really was the sounds of the CS80 that kind of changed my life as far as synthesizers went. I cut my teeth, though, on a Korg Poly 6 around maybe 97, 98. And it was really then, that was the first instrument that I put my hands on where I discovered I could make my own sounds. And I was trying to recreate, what I would consider the perfect brass sound to try to get some of those sounds on Toto 4, mainly the brass sound to Africa, which is another amazing track on that album. But highlights for me on that album, obviously Rosanna and Africa, but also the little synth touches that Steve Porcaro sprinkled throughout that album. You can hear them on tracks like Make Believe, Good For You, It's a Feeling, song that he wrote for that album, Lovers in the Night, an amazing keyboard solo on Waiting For Your Love. Just that whole album is spectacular. And on that note, I got this note right here. Toto 4 is my Synthspiration.
Hello, Pro Synth Network. This is Micky Dodds. Right, so we are discussing our Synthspirations, albums or tracks that basically changed our lives and made us want to get synthesizers and make music with synthesizers, basically getting us all moist around the gusset, as Rob would say. About synthesis in general, well, in 1983 when I was 10, whilst being driven to primary school by my dad, on the radio was a track that just blew my tiny 10-year-old little mind. That track was Love on Your Side by the Thompson Twins. The opening sequence of that track just made me go, what? Yeah, that I can remember the moment vividly. It's taken from this album. Oh, here we go. I have it on my battered old, played out 41-year-old vinyl. Quick Step and Sidekick. You can see it's just covered in sellotape. It has been played to death. Unfortunately, it's full of scratches, but I have got myself a newer vinyl that is in much better condition, plus all their other records as well. The production on this album is just pure synth pop gold. From the Prophet 5 synthesizer, a bit of Fairlight, Oberheim OBX-A, or the OBX. Yeah, absolutely amazing. Tom Bailey was just a master of songwriting back in the day. What stands out for me really is the drum machine. Apparently it was the movement drum machine, which was very much made famous by the Eurythmics, because they showcased it on the video for Sweet Dreams. But that movement drum track, whatever they used to process it, it just cut through the mix. It's so punchy. And as a result, we have got a classic album. Yeah, everything about the Thompson Twins, just their animated characters, the way they made their music videos, just as a 10-year-old, it was like, my word. Everybody else was into Kajagoogoo, etc. For me, it started off with the Thompson Twins. Every Christmas after that, I always wanted a synthesizer. Never got the synthesizer because, prohibitively expensive. My parents couldn't afford it. But that all changed when I turned 16. When I got my first job, I saved up all of my wages for months, and I bought myself finally my own synthesizer. That was a Korg Poly 800, a Mark II. And then I saved up a lot of months afterwards again and got the Mark I. I did it arse about face, as we say here in Northern Ireland. And that just fueled my want for synthesizers now, and I have a little bit of a collection. Not as big as some of you people's collection, but enough so I can actually make my own music, and I do. I record under the name of Asign. You can get me on Spotify and other streaming sites as well. But yeah, this album, this is what set me off on my journey to wanting synthesizers and eventually getting synthesizers. So yeah, if you haven't heard this album, check it out. It is amazing. So there you go, guys. That's my Synthspirations, the Thompson Twins Quick Step and Sidekick.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, PSN, everybody watching and everyone in the chat room. I'm Sean, or if you are regular viewers and in the chat room, you would probably know me better as Kissing the Machine. And just like to talk about an album that was very definitely an inspiration for me from way back when, and probably trace it all the way back from there to sitting here surrounded by all of this kit. And it's an album that was brought out in 1980, and I'm just going to adjust my camera and show you it where it normally lives. Pride of place above the synths. I'll just go and take it down in a minute. In fact, I'll go and take it down now. So this is, if you haven't recognised it, it is Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, and their self-titled, back to front actually, self-titled album from 1980. And I was 17 at the time. And I'm just going to take this out of the frame and just tell you a little bit about the history of the album and how I came across it, and then what it meant to me. So if I take this out and just show you there, hopefully on the camera, you can see signatures. The history was that when we were at school, we used to just cycle down to my mate's house at lunchtime. He's actually signed it here, handsomely and modest as always. And we'd cycle down to his house, 5 or 6 of us, and we'd just spend the lunchtime eating our sandwiches and listening to whatever was on the turntable. And he had an older sister. We were 17, I think she might have been 20, 21, infinitely cooler than us and into music, and she was listening to lots of alternative stuff. And this was on the turntable. Didn't know what it was at the time. We just stuck it on one lunchtime, listened to it, and I just thought that sounds quite interesting. And it certainly wasn't the first electronic music I'd listened to. I'd listened to Kraftwerk on and off through the 70s, and I was a big Jean-Michel Jarre fan by then. But this just caught my ear, and then for lunchtime, after lunchtime, weeks and weeks and weeks, I pestered my friends. I'd just say, listen to the orange one, listen to the orange one. And they got fed up of it, and they eventually bought it for me for my 17th birthday. So it was actually quite a treasure to me because of the signatures there of lots of friends, old school friends, on the back. And I just played it continuously on my parents' little mono turntable that sat on their sideboard at home. My dad was a massive crooner fan, so he was into Sinatra and Jim Reeves and Tony Bennett and all of that. So you can imagine how this thing went down. He hated it. So it just made me play it more and more. And this was the album that I think cemented my love, certainly of the band. It's been a lifelong thing for me, OMD. Actually love the band and their music. But this was the album that really cemented the realisation that I liked the sound of synthesizers, even more than the musicality in the tunes, I think. And quite famously, this was just a single synthesizer album, Korg Micro Preset, and then lots of other equipment, I think, that Paul Humphries had made himself. And it's just a very complex album made with actually very simple kit. Famously, Andy McCluskey bought the Korg synth from his mum's mail order catalogue, and I researched it. I think it was $776 for 36 weeks, which is about £280. And adjusting that for inflation from 1980 to now, that's just short of £1,900. So thinking what you could get now with the equivalent, you're into, well, Pro 3, Sub 37, Matrix Brute, how things have moved on. But yeah, it was really just that appreciation of the sound of a synthesizer. And part of the inspiration for me is when I'm messing around with these things, if I'm not particularly inspired to try and make music or make a tune, just listening to the sound of them is enough for me. And I think this is where it all started. If I take it out, I don't know if you can see it, but it looks like I've eaten my dinner off it. I mean, I played this so much, I'm sure it wouldn't play now. 3 singles on it: Red Frame, White Light, Electricity, and Messages. If you know the album, then a particular favourite of mine is the last track on side 1, the Messerschmitt Twins. But just really nostalgic when I listen to it now. And thinking about it musically, and I wouldn't have thought this at the time because I just listened to music. I wouldn't have had any language to describe music or anything like that. When I listen to it now, it is pitch drifty and detuned and, full of all of the things that sometimes I think we just try to get out of our music. And I call it laziness, but when I'm messing around with this stuff and it's not quite in tune, then I think, well, if it was good enough for OMD, then it was good enough. Then it's good enough for me. So yeah, that's the album. Yeah, I can trace it all the way back to this album and this group. So thank you for indulging me. If I'm in the chat and this is played, then happy to answer any questions. And yeah, we'll just have a chat about it. But thank you, and have a good rest of the evening. Thank you. Bye now.
Oh, hello, Keythin Watford here. Just come to talk about the album, the music that influenced me into my love of synthesizers, keyboards, electronic music, etc, etc, etc. Brief history. 1971. My parents bought me a transistor radio, and I started listening to the likes of Radio Luxembourg, washing in and out of Europe in the evenings, and Radio 1, quite like pop music. And so, watching Top of the Pops, synthesizers started to appear, making all sorts of weird and wonderful noises. So, I had an interest in keyboards anyway. My parents had bought me they'd inherited a piano off a relative that had moved away. So I was taking basic piano lessons, basic ones, and watched Top of the Pops, more Synth, and then artists like bands like ELO come on the scene, and then Richard Tandy, his piano and synthesizer keyboard playing exemplary, got a lot of ELO records, and then of course lots of other bands come along, but this was all in my school days, so around about whatever year this album is, 1970, can't see it. Came out and my mate had bought it, my schoolmate had bought it, and listened to it at his house. Blew my mind, absolutely blew my mind. Japanese artists, synthesizers, just didn't believe that it could be done and things like that. Teasing picture on the back cover of his setup, and that was it. Played it, loved it, bought my own copy. So this is it, my own copy. It's Tomatoes, Snowflakes Are Dancing. It's the music of Debussy. What's that, Frank? It's pronounced Debussy. Oh, okay, so it's the music of Debussy. Front and back, there you go. So it's took synthesizers beyond any realms, worlds that I ever knew existed, and it was a long time before I actually heard Walter / Wendy Carlos and the Switched On series, but unlike the Carlos records, this just took synthesizers to another world, another dimension. The tracks on it, I wasn't aware of the music of Debussy, but obviously for me it was a great introduction. The tracks, the first 4 notes, Snowflake, the track side A, track 1, Snowflakes Are Dancing, the first 4 notes repeating and then evolving as the track went on. All the tracks just so different. The introduction of all sorts of sounds, including, unfortunately, there's a non-PC one now called something Cakewalk, but it's on there. On the back, there's a picture of the man himself, some of the Moog, and the listing of the modules in the Moog, the 2 mixers used, the 5 tape recorders, and some accessories including the Benson Eckerec Dimension 4 Fender Mellotron, AKG Echo Unit, and an Eventide Clockworks Instant Phaser. All adds up to synthesizer sounds just being taken, as I said, into another dimension. If you've never heard it, give it a listen. If you have heard it, well, you know what I'm talking about. That is what set me off. And in the sort of mid-70s, there's no internet, obviously. We just relied on virtually nothing of our information and it all, but that's where it all started. So I will say that is my choice, and TTFN.
Hello, my name's Karl Bedford and this is my Synthspirations. So I've been collecting music since I was a little boy, and mainly vinyl. So and it's taken me around the world DJing. So here's my take, but it's very difficult for me to choose one record because I have such a big record collection, and and I love all different genres of music. One of my favourite records is Manuel Gottschin's E2, E4, which I went to see in Todmington. So we've got here just classic records on my wall, which inspired me as a kid. You've got from Paul Simon to Michael Jackson, Massive Attack, Grace Jones, John Coltrane, Kraftwerk, Prince, Curtis Mayfield, the list goes on. And that goes all the way up here into my studio. We've got Jimmy Cliff, Blondie, Lou Reed, Diana Ross, Kate Bush, Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, Dr. Dre, David Bowie, of course. And then this is my studio, which is almost finished, but it's never ever finished. And here we have more records, more vinyl, which I've collected from all around the world. And yeah, it's forever going up and coming down. I do give a lot of records away, and I've given a lot of records to DJs, but like I say, it's really hard for me to choose one record. But since there's everything in here, there's funk, jazz, disco, soul, but seeing as it's we're talking about synthesizers, obviously there's a couple of records which I've got to mention, which is Switch on Back, of course. Then a lot of Brian Eno, ambient for music for airports, and the Apollo one, Kraftwerk, Jan Hammer, Jean-Michel Jarre records, Tangerine Dream. I could go on and on and on, but they're not my choices. I'm just showing you that I collect everything, and I've got everything. This is my digital DJ setup. So let's go to the next room and I'll show you one of my choices. I'm picking two, by the way, so that's it. So this is another listening area where I've got my gold turntables and my custom-made rotary mixer by my good friend in Leeds who made me that. And here I can do some real vinyl DJing and practice. But so there's more records here. And shout out to this record, you'll probably know it, Mark Garson's Plantasia. If you follow Anthony Marinelli, he's got his the synthesizer that made it, the modular, Moog Modular, which is interesting. So that I always love to listen to. But I mean, yeah, I've got so much stuff. Shout out to this one I used to listen to as a kid. I've got a massive collection of Italian horror, sci-fi, just lots of weird stuff. This I always remembered as a kid, The Music of the Cosmos by Carl Sagan, because my friend's dad used to have it and we used to play it as kids, and it was weird, classical, but again, lots of Vangelis is on that one. What else have we got? Some this record, Voice of Taurus, Bruno Spirelli, is a Swiss guy, but synth, like a crazy electronic disco, funk, and using Synth 100. But as a kid, we used to go to a disco on a Wednesday night, like a teenage disco, and the DJ was quite cool. He was eclectic, and he'd play normal stuff in the 70s and 80s, like, you know, Adam and the Ants and so on. But he used to drop this anyway, it's Streff, and it's called Set It Off. And this really, I mean, I'm going to choose this as one of my records because I've always been a hip-hop electro fan, and my favourite instrument is the 808, and this is just the 808 all over it. But it was remixed by... it came from New Jersey, but it was remixed by a guy called Walter Gibbons. Now, Walter Gibbons, he was like a disco DJ in the early 70s, and he went on to remix a lot of records, but it was the guy who made the first 12-inch. This one came out in 1984, and it inspired so many artists, like Pharrell Williams, but it's just a beautiful record, really well done, and it still holds up today, and it still destroys dance floors today. When you play that, it's massive. So that's one of my records, 808, the 808, and it's just a beautiful record, and it's worth about $200. That's the original. So yeah, let's go to my little listening room I've got, and I'll pick one more. So, this is my listening corner with a lot of great records, a big collection of soundtracks and scores, and soul and funk, and again, a lot of weird stuff, a lot of electronic music, hip-hop, you name it, it's all here. And sometimes I put my headphones on and I can sit all day, read books and listen to records on here. But if I'm honest with you, the record that I wanted to pick as my inspiration, I couldn't find it. Now, if I do find it, maybe I'll do one in the future, because that's what really my inspiration, but I'll not tell you what it is. But so I've got so many records, I choose something else. But like I said, I spent a day going through my records and I just couldn't find it. And I've got so many records, I just don't know what it is. So what I did find is my collection of Tomita. So we've got pictures at an exhibition, Cosmos, Firebird. But my real inspiration record for today is the Bermuda Triangle. Now, sadly, he passed away, I think it was 2016, but for me, he was a genius. I mean, what he did with electronic music and with his systems and the way he just made music, he was just a genius. I mean, he inspired Stevie Wonder and so many people, and obviously his inspiration was Wendy Carlos, but for me, this record, I can listen to it over and over and over again. And one of my good friends, Karl Finlow, who's a famous electro producer, he introduced me to this record when we used to be in the studio back in the 90s, and he used to play it in the studio. And he's still making music now. If you Google him, he's massive. But we used to listen to this together, and he put me onto this. So thank you, Karl. And yeah, so that's my record, real record, or the second record for my inspiration, Tomita, Mita, and the Bermuda Triangle. And yeah, brilliant. So thank you, everybody, and thank you for the community. Thank you to Robbie and PSN and Ken and all the guys, and thank you to you people for keeping me inspired, keeping me interested. I mean, I love music, I love synthesizers, and I love sound, and it's just a great community, and I wish you all Merry Christmas and a really Happy New Year, and I hope 2025 is going to be a healthy one for everybody, and we can continue with this beautiful game. We're living in such a great time when it comes to music and synthesizers. So yeah, thank you, and see you all guys at one of the shows, I guess. Take it easy. Keep it real.
Hello, I'm Joe O'Donnell from Simsbury, Connecticut. I've been playing keyboards, piano for over 40 years, and I want to talk to you about my synthspiration. So my synthspiration occurred back in college. It was right around 1985-86, and I had my keyboards with me in college, and I was walking around the dorm, and I heard this noise coming out of someone else's room. Not really noise, but I couldn't explain what it was I was hearing. So I walked down, leaned into his room, and I said, "What is this?" And he looked at me, he goes, "It's ELP." I said, "Oh, I know about them. No, but I mean, what is this you're playing?" He says, "Oh, it's their live album, Welcome Back, My Friends." And it was the solo from Hoedown, the Moog solo. And I almost had to sit down. I was so overcome when I heard that, because as you guys know, we never heard anything like that before. And I said, what is this guy doing? So here's Eddie Van Halen before Eddie Van Halen, but on synth. So I said, I have to figure out how to get that sound. I have to learn this solo. So that really started my journey from true inspiration on the synthesizers. I did a lot of piano before that, but I really got into the synths in college. And this really motivated me. So here I am at 60 years old, and there's no way I'm going to get Keith's Moog in here, and neither is anybody else. So no one's going to really get that sound except on that instrument. But we can try because we have the VSTs. So over here in my Studio One, I'm using not a Mini Moog VST. I'm using Vacuum Pro from Air Technologies. And with that, with some reverb, has a pretty good simulation to what Keith was doing. in the hoedown solo. And because it's improv, I don't think we'll get a copyright check. So I'm going to walk over here and have you listen a little bit of what the sound is like. So that's my attempt at Keith's Moog. So the Welcome Back, My Friends was something, like I said, I'd never heard before, and it's always been my aspiration to learn those songs. They'll always be challenging to me, and there'll always be a bar for me to reach. I, of course, was influenced by Wakeman and Tony Banks and people like that, but Keith Emerson always felt had something dear to me because there was no one like him. And he was his own man, and I always appreciated that. So, welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. The live album was my Synthspiration. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome. This is aDeevision. This is my Synthspiration. Don't worry, the vocoder won't be on all the time. So, some of the Synthspiration stuff that I done over the years is fairly recent, to be fair. I'm quite new to the whole thing. So, only been really started since lockdown. So unlike pretty much everybody else, I don't really have a background in the music industry or background in any kind of thing apart from computer programming and stuff like that. Anyway, these are some of the inspirations. That's more of a book. This book by Peter Hook about New Order. In fact, it's also the book prior to this, which was in Joy Division, which when I realised that these guys basically had no musical knowledge, very little in the way of skill when they started off anyway. And I just thought, you know what, they could probably do that. But at the time, way back in the 80s, or even in the late 70s, it never even occurred to me that anybody could actually sort of do this kind of thing. Certainly not me. So some records, that one, yeah, I've had this since 1983. And it's just about managed to survive a flood in a cellar, cats, and other stuff that's happened over the years. So the other things, musical-wise, let's have a look. We have Simple Minds, which is the Sisters Feeling Call, which has got some great tracks on it, which is Theme for Great Cities, which is probably hardly anybody's ever heard of, but I love it. That's one of them. The Human League Unlimited Orchestra, which I think is still better than Dare in some respects. Ultravox, well, you can't really beat this album, can you, really? Vienna. I mean, the best one on here I like is things like Sleepwalk, Astrodyne, New Europeans, which I think is just ace. And then moving into more darker territory, hopefully you can see it, is the Sisters of Mercy, First, Last and Always. So there's some, this has influenced some of my music of late. It's Black Planet, Marianne, Some Kind of Stranger, and last but not least, and sadly not the original, but it's a new release, one of Joy Division's Closer album. And well, there's basically two sides, and one side I'm not massively keen on, but some of them are all right. And the other side has got 24 hours and Decades on, and I think Decades is probably one of the most beautiful songs ever done. So that's kind of mostly my Synthspirations. But prior to all this musical stuff, let's go, if I went way back to the 70s, I started playing violin when I was a kid, about 7, and played in an orchestra when I was about 11, very youth orchestra I used to play in. And then we moved up to County Durham when I was in 76. And in those years, we didn't really do anything music-wise because there was no music at school, no school bands. And the local town was miles away because we lived in the middle of the countryside. So there was just gave up music, basically, all the way through the end of the 70s, all through the 80s and most of the 90s. And so even though I've liked electronic music ever since, since forever, really, it never really occurred to me that I could play any of it. And I could never play keyboards, even though I have one now. And but I just, sort of diddle about with it. But I suppose, so some musical knowledge. But in the later, towards the 80s and 90s, I got more into this kind of thing. Jazz, especially Miles Davis and some of the other stuff. Because I play saxophone as well, although I haven't played it for a good while now. And in Duke Ellington, this was a blues in orbit, which is a little different to the normal, average, big bandy type stuff that you would probably expect from Duke Ellington. But a lot of it is quite different, and much later on after the war. It was 1958, I think this was made or produced thereabouts in the 50s. And so, there you go. There's a little bit of my Synthspiration stuff for the stuff I do nowadays. Hope you enjoy. Bye for now. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
So here we are, post-Christmas, just before New Year, with a very stripped-back room. Well, not stripped back, just not lit. Everything's still here, but it's a slightly rawer look than perhaps you're used to seeing. And this is my Synthspiration. In fact, I'm going to be doing a series of 6 more, which we'll put on Patreon, which describe more completely my journey into electronic music and why I love it so much. But this is the start of it, and it sets a trend that has lasted through to the present day. In 1969, when I was 11 years old, yes, I'm that old, the Beatles bought out Abbey Road. Abbey Road was a brilliant album for all sorts of reasons. It was very popular, very poppy, very memorable. But more importantly, it was the first time I had heard a Moog synthesizer being used on anything, a synthesizer of anything, in any sort of music, really. It may not have been the first. I certainly hadn't heard Walter Carlos, Wendy Now, but this was the first time I heard it, and it was astonishing. It blew my mind. Late in the recording process, George Harrison had already bought very recently, a large Moog modular with 2 keyboards, and he brought it into the sessions very late on, and they started adding it to a few tracks. So they added it to Maxwell's Silver Hammer, I Want You, Here Comes the Sun, and Because. And in each of those tracks, it doesn't always feature a lot, and in some more than others, but it is very memorable when it comes in because it's a new texture. This was a band who used real instruments, played them themselves. There wasn't a huge amount of effects added to anything. Reverbs and delays were used really sparingly. But they use this, they use the Moog, sometimes multi-tracking it, to add these new textures into these songs. And it made my ears prick up. Having been brought up listening to classical music with all the stories and arrangements and instrumentation explained by my mum to me when I was very little, I wasn't trained. I never learned to play anything. But I knew enough about it to go, what the blooming heck's that? And it reminded me so much of those orchestral textures in places. The first time I heard portmanteau on a synth, ever. And it was just glorious. And I went, what the blooming heck? And more importantly, every time it comes in, every time you hear one of the Moog lines, or multiples of them where they've multi-tracked them, they sit ridiculously comfortably. They add something to it that wouldn't otherwise be there, but they don't stand out like a sore thumb. It blended so well with the real instruments, and that's something which, in a very long and circular journey, I've gone through from this, working with real instruments as well as synths, through to all electronic and through to the other end, where now, what I like most of all is mixing electronic music or electronic sounds with real players, because they bring something that's unique. And so does synthesis. So Abbey Road changed my life, and it's stayed with me ever since, even before I really knew I wanted to do anything with music. And, I just loved it. And it made a massive, massive impression. And as soon as I started hearing some of the other things which you'll hear in the extended series, you'll see why it stuck with me, and how that journey started, and what the path of that circular is, as it were. So that's my Synthspiration, Abbey Road, by the Beatles. If you haven't listened to it, go and get a copy or listen to it online. It is astonishing. It's really quite astonishing. And I bid you a happy 2025. Bye.
Hey up, Andy here. Come to talk about my Synthspirations, and my goodness, there have been many over the years. Synthesizer stuff. I mean, I could probably go back to 1972. A band called Chicory Tip brought out Son of My Father. Shortly after that was Popcorn by Hot Butter. And then in 1973, I bought Nutbush City Limits by Ike and Tina Turner, just because it had a synth lead. I didn't know it was a Moog or a Moog or whatever. To me, I didn't really sort of latch on to what the synthesizers were. I just thought, what is this sound? I just loved the sounds that were coming out that were different to the, I wouldn't say run-of-the-mill, not by a long chalk, guitar, drums, bass guitar, that sort of thing, singing. So synths were different to me, and I really loved the sound. So fast forward a little bit to 1975. Got some notes on my screen over there. Kraftwerk released an album. In fact, I think the album was released in 74. Then early 75, they released Autobahn as a 3-minute single, and that's how I managed to hear of it, because it actually got radio play on radio. The top Radio 1 in the UK. And I thought, wow, what's this? I've got to have that. And I went to the town where I lived at the time, and I come home with the full album, which was brilliant. I really loved that album. And then I think I probably just jumped a little bit too forward there, because in 1974 there was some program I wanted to watch on the telly. It was a Sunday afternoon, and before it had started, there was another program coming to an end. It was like I think it was a religious discussion program, and the outro music, I thought, what's that? That sounds good, and it turned out to be, well, I mean, and unusually in the credits, as well as the credits rolling up, it said music by Tangerine Dream. And I thought, wow, what's that? Tangerine Dream. So I think it was Phaedra at the time, because I don't think Rubicon was out by then. So it would have been Phaedra. So February 75 was Kraftwerk with Autobahn. And then in March 1975, I mentioned Rubicon. Rubicon came out, so yeah, I've got that album still on vinyl. My all-time favourite, I will say, but I won't going to say which is my Synthspiration yet, but I think you can probably guess. And then I think I did eventually go and buy more stuff of theirs, obviously, at that time. And then, as has been mentioned previously on at least one of the Synthspiration is Tomita. And the reason I found this album, I was living in Warrington by this time, so in 1975, I was 15, we'd moved back up to Warrington, and I used to go to Dawson's in town and spend hours just going through all the A, B, C, everything in there, and I would get each album out and I would look at the back of the cover and look for any sort of kit list, and that is one hell of a kit list, I can tell you. I mean, that was like, what? I'm having that. Got it home, listened to it, blew my mind. I'd never even heard of Firebird Suite by Stravinsky or Debussy or Mussorgsky. Never even heard of them before. But here's a guy putting classical music to electronic instruments. So yeah, that's that one. Got millions down here. Kraftwerk, I mean, I bought the first. This was like a double album. It's the first 2 albums really issued as one double album. Yes, I mean, prog band. I was well into my prog by this time as well. So, yeah, this wasn't Rick Wakeman actually. This was played by, or the keyboards on this album was played by Pat Moraz. And I'm not sure. I think he might have played the Oberheim. No kit list on here, so I can't really say. Hawkwind, it's synths. They're a bit mad, but it's electronic music, believe it or not. It's some electronic spacey rock. Good stuff. Vangelis. I'm just going through all my. Is it Vangelis? I'm sure you put me right in the chat. But yeah, this is going to be all my all-time fave Vangelis album. Albedo 0.39. I mean, as well on this, so a lot of percussion on this track as well, and a lot of sort of like jazz orientated stuff. It was a bit of an ear opener for that sort of thing as well. Can't not mention Jean-Michel Jarre with Oxygen, and there's my Autobar out of order. Yeah, Oxygen and Equinox. I have got Equinox down there somewhere, but yeah, started off with Oxygen again. So he got quite a bit of airplay, whereas some of the other bands wouldn't. The electronic bands wouldn't get any air. I mean, you'd never hear very rarely, sort of like you wouldn't hear Hawkwind on the radio. Probably they did do one, didn't they? Silver Machine got played a lot, but other than that, nothing. Quite popular, Jean-Michel Jarre. So yeah, good stuff. And then also, another find as I was like going through all the albums at Dawson's would have been Larry Fast and the Synergy project. Synths, absolutely gorgeous stuff. More popular. I mean, I didn't listen to a lot of popular music back then, because I mean, I've got to blame probably my parents and one of my uncles for that, because they were throwing stuff at me by bands like Pentangle, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, and especially Pink Floyd. I mean, the first Pink Floyd album I got was as a birthday present or whatever, might have been a Christmas present, was Medal, with a 20-minute long track on the B-side, and it's like, wow, amazing stuff. But I do have some popular stuff. So I bought Tubeway Army replicas. Probably the most popular one off this one would be, let's have a look down here, Friends Electric probably. Or is it, let's have a look. No, I think it was just, yeah, Our Friends Electric. But again, the synths, so I thought, well, I've got to have that as well. But my only real popular one, I did have an Ultravox album, but I can't find it. I bought Lament. I'm sure I did. I'm sure I did, but it's gone missing. Anyway, bit of a sampler on the Brain label. They were good for sort of like what was classed in those days as krautrock. Not a label that I'm particularly fond of, but yeah, German bands, sort of German bands on there. So where am I up to now? Time wise, oh my goodness, I'm only up to 10 minutes. So what I'm going to do now, because I've got loads of stuff down there. I've got to say, and as I say, you might have guessed it, and I've actually mentioned it in the chat before, Rubicon is my biggest Synthspiration. I mean, this is probably my second vinyl copy, and I've even got I've got a box set as well. I bought the box set, the 1980s box set, it's called 70 to 80. So Rubicon's in there as well. So I absolutely listened to this and wore it out at least once. Brilliant album. Instruments wise, they do have a kit list in here, and it's just the usual, I guess. There's they were quite fond of the Mellotron. Edgar played guitar, of course. Double Moog, Synthia, Elka organ, a VCS3, and an ARP 2600. So yeah, some classic synths on there, and it was just, I mean, I couldn't even tell you which synths were making which noise. To me, it didn't matter back then. I just loved synthesizer music. Yeah, my Synthspirations. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Greetings, Earthlings. I am Rozz Grey, and these are my top 10 Synthspirations, a selection of the songs and gear that have most influenced me, presented in that odd linear chronometric sequence you humans seem to like. First, I present Here Come the Fleas, from the album An Electric Storm by White Noise. The boffin behind this experiment was David Vorhaus, aided by BBC Radiophonic Workshop renegades Brian Hodgson and Delia Derbyshire. The trio constructed a unique album with little more than drums, vocals, double bass, and noises like twanging rulers and revving motorcycles. This album showcases the tape manipulation genius of Derbyshire, who expertly weaves these disparate sonic elements into an otherworldly symphony. Here Come the Fleas also includes an early form of sampling, as some sound effects were taken from an electronic cover version of Strangers in the Night by the duo of Ondioline pioneer Jean-Jacques Perret and popcorn composer Gershon Kingsley. Following that, here's Time Captives from the album Journey by Kingdom Come, a psychedelic space rock band fronted by Arthur Brown of Fire fame. This was the first album to use a drum machine, the Bentley Rhythm Ace, in place of an acoustic drummer. Brown was quick to realise that the really big advantage with using a drum machine was you only had to punch the rhythm in once. Time Captives is awash in VCS3, ARP 2600, Mellotron and Veremin, courtesy of lab-coated synth wizard Victor Pereno. My third selection is Searching for the Spark from the album Motivation Radio by Steve Hillage, a virtuoso of the Roland guitar synth and tempo-synced delay. With collaborator Micky Dodds on ARP and EMS synths, Hillage co-produced this album with Malcolm Cecil, using the huge Tonto monster he built with Robert Margolef. Spark is driven by a pulsating stereo synth sequence, festooned with pitch sweeps and bubbling modulations, and accumulates in a scorching guitar synth solo that's guaranteed to raise your vibrations to a whole different dimension, man. Far out. Pyramid. Nextly, here's I Pity Inanimate Objects from the album Freeze Frame by Godley and Cream. Kevin Godley and Lol Cream were half of 10cc before they split to develop the Gizmotron, an ingenious device that bows guitar strings using spinning wheels. This song is based around the imaginative use of an eventide harmonizer. Godley recorded his vocals in a monotone, then ran it through the harmonizer with Cream playing a keyboard, wildly transposing the pitches to produce a glitchy yodeling effect. And this is Underpass from the album Metamatic by John Fox. Fox fronted the original incarnation of Ultravox, pioneering commercially accessible synthpop with the album Systems of Romance marking an early high point. When Fox subsequently split to make this solo venture, he used only an 8-track studio with a Roland CR78, Elka string machine and ARP Odyssey, giving the album a sparse minimalist feel, evoking a bleak dystopian vibe. And now let me take you down under, so to speak, to Murrumbidgee River from the album Rivers by Claude Larson. Synth pioneer Larson was an early user of the Fairlight CMI, which hails from Australia like the aforementioned river, Dunnet. This instrumental piece evokes an idyllic riverboat journey, mixing water sounds and kookaburra calls with strings, guitar, whistle and a good old didgeridoo. In spite of the short sample times and 8-bit quality of the original Fairlight, Larson demonstrates that, in talented hands, it can create lush and richly textured symphonic soundscapes. Bonza! And now to the moon with Deep Blue Day from the album Apollo by Brian Eno. This album is the soundtrack to Luke Reinert's movie about the Apollo moon landings, which I keenly followed at the time, albeit through binoculars from a nearby crater. The album features Suzuki Omnichord, Yamaha CS80 and DX7, with sounds often played at varying speeds using reverse and forward delays. This is the song where Eno invented the technique of putting a reverb through a harmonizer to create endlessly rising reverberated octaves, which inspired a popular dance craze on our planet called the Shimmer. Talking of the blues, check out Blue Orpheus from the album A Cappella by Todd Rundgren. This guy is an outrageously talented singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist and producer. On this album he uses only the sounds of his voice, hand claps and foot stamps, sampled and processed through an emulator to evoke the sound of an entire band. Rundgren demonstrates how short, low-quality samples and a limited sound palette can be skillfully arranged and engineered to create a pounding piece of high-energy rock. Penultimately, butt pickers, this is Remembering the 60s from the album Thief in the Night by George Duke. A virtuoso keyboardist, Duke was also a brilliant innovator, once sporting a clavinet he had fitted with a whammy bar. This album is pure soul funk synth heaven, replete in luxuriant layers of synclavia, memory moog, Prophet 5 and pumping Lindrum. This song was co-written by another great synth pioneer, Stevie Wonder, and pays homage to that golden decade, referencing Martin Luther King's speech, the moon landings, and quoting the Supremes and Jimi Hendrix. Not half. And finally, I present Language is a Virus from the album Home of the Brave by Laurie Anderson. Anderson is a vividly imaginative multimedia artist who invents her own instruments, such as a suit lined with drum triggers and a violin fitted with a playback head with a tape attached to the bow. Her playfully satirical albums make much mind-bending use of synclavia, vocoder and harmonizer. Language is a Virus was produced by Nile Rodgers, who also plays guitar and synclavia, and was inspired by William S. Burroughs' assertion that language is a virus from outer space. And I'm an actual bony Fido alien, so I can totally verify that, because my vocabulary is as bad as like whatever innit. I mean, sometimes it's like shaka when the walls fell around here. Dag nabbit, either that's the front doorbell or my old DX1 is playing up again. Oh well, thanks for listening folks. Be seeing you.
G'day, Robbie and the Pro Synth Network. My name's Tieran. I live just on the outside of Melbourne, and I thought, being inspired by your Synthspirations series, I'd send you up one from down under just to show how wide your network is. My Synthspiration is a three-part story. The first part is actually really about some Synthspirers, in that in my first couple of years at a out-of-the-way high school in the northern suburbs of Melbourne, there were a couple of proggy, hippie music teachers, and for some reason they taught us wayward kids how to splice tape, how to play guitar, and just by chance they had a couple of mono synthesizers. I don't know how on earth they had those in the school. It wasn't exactly a school flush with money, but we had a Yamaha CS5 and a Korg MS10, and they taught us how to do synthesis on those and how to play music in general. It was a great start. At the same time, I was obviously exposed already to a whole lot of electronic music with a father with broad music tastes, and our local radio station here, a community radio station, 3PBS FM, which you can still find on the internet. There were a couple of programs on that radio station. One, the Electronic Influence, and the second one, the Progressive Rock Show, that played all of the classics we know and love, from Ger to Vangelis, Genesis, and plenty more. So from that background, we sort of move into part two of my Synthspiration, which was in January of 1985. We went on a family holiday, as we did every year, up into the south coast of southern New South Wales, where my grandparents lived. And obviously had to keep entertained for the 7 or 8 hour drive up there, and had a Walkman with some tapes to keep myself entertained. So it just so happened that for Christmas on that occasion, I got the Zuluk from album from Ger. And while that was inspiring, that sort of leads me through to the handmade tape I had, which did have Oxygen on it as well, but it had another odd one, which was the Pentateuch of the Cosmogony from Dave Greenslade. Now, while that maybe doesn't stand so well in the test of time musically, this is the album cover if you haven't seen it before. It's very proggy, electronic stuff, a whole concept album. I'll just show you a short video here of flicking through the pages quickly. It's a book of some spaceship saving humanity, going to Jupiter. You can see it all described on the internet if you're curious. But the inspiring thing was just the sound of this album. And if you look on the back page, which I can show you here, there's a huge range of incredible synthesizer technology from the time, including ARPs, Moogs, Prophets, all sorts of things, Yamahas, CS80s, CS60s, all sorts of things. And really it was the sound of that album that stuck in my mind and stuck with me forever to keep me inspired. Now, at the same time, just moving into the later 80s with teenage parties, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation had a program called Rage, which played late into the night with all of the video clips. Now, they were looking for lots of content. So the second Synthspiration I'm going to put forward is Severed Heads, who are an Australian electronic outfit playing sort of alternative electro pop electronic sort of stuff, and they got well known because of their incredible video clips that were pretty innovative for the time. So you can check those out on YouTube if you're interested. But they set the tone, and despite not being in the top 10 pop kind of vibe that would normally be played on some of those MTV type programs. Their video clips sent them up that they did have a couple of well-known tracks back in the time, and their use of electronic devices was quite inspiring as well. So I'll leave you with both of those as my Synthspirations, the Severed Heads, the Australian band, and Dave Greenslade with the Pentateuch of the Cosmogony. Catch you all later.
Hello, this is Matt Evans, and this is my Synthspiration. I grew up in the 70s listening to the music that my parents were listening to, so mainly the Stones, the Beatles, Moody Blues, the Shadows, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Rick Wakeman, and I never really paid attention to it. And then in 1974, Kraftwerk dropped this album. When I heard the title track, and specifically the middle eight with that sort of modulated bass sound and the white noise snare sound, I remember even as a very young child thinking, what the hell is that? And that first sort of turned me on to synthetic sound because it was so unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Jump forward to 1976, although I wouldn't have heard this until 1977, and Jean-Michel Jarre dropped Oxygen. Again, it was a similar thing. There were certain sounds in Oxygen 4, which would have been what I would have heard, that made me prick up my ears, and it made me realise that it wasn't necessarily tracks that I was listening to or that I wanted to hear. It was noises. I was interested in unusual, strange noises, and that became the basis for a lot of the tracks that I've discovered and the bands that I've discovered ever since. There's always been a strong visual element to my life. My mother was an excellent painter in her younger years, and my father was one of the most eminent photographers of his time. And so I remember being in Woolworths in about 1979 and seeing this single, this record cover with a really, really striking visual aspect to it for me. So I picked it up and bought it, not realising, of course, that Gary Numan was who Gary Numan was. Once I took that record home and played it, I fell in love with it. And so I went back looking for Gary Numan, and that's when I came across The Pleasure Principle. There were plenty of tracks on that album that I absolutely adored, but of course the one that stands out, I think, for everyone is Cars. Again, put me right on to Gary Numan for many, many years. By 1981, my brother was influencing what I was listening to because I was hearing all of the stuff that he was discovering and playing. And he started playing this album called Duran Duran. And there was some really swooshy, stringy noises coming off of it, and so I sort of investigated and listened to it and started a real passion for the sonic stuff that Nick Rhodes was putting over the top of these albums. Of course, then I followed them and watched Nick Rhodes playing the keyboards that he did on TV. Found out that it was Krumars and Rolands and things like that. And then they released Rio in 1982. And I saw the stage set that they had with the big columns in the background, and Nick Rhodes with his Fairlight and this bloody great Roland sitting atop it, which I later found out was a Jupiter 8, and that was all over that album. And it was the sounds that machine made, as well as the looks of the thing, that gave me a passion for it. And I've loved them ever since. Never played one, and I hope to one day. But I love the looks and I love the sounds that I've heard many, many people, Howard Jones and Alan Wilder and people like that the noises they've extracted from that machine. All the way through the 80s, I listened to lots and lots of albums that seemed to catch my ear, things like Quick Step and Sidekick by Thompson Twins, Humans Live from Howard Jones, White Feathers by Kajagoogoo. Lots of bits of Level 42 that I heard spilling from my brothers. Upstairs at Eric, Yazoo, Dare from the Human League, Pet Shop Boys, Please, and things like Sweet Drinks and Eurythmics. But bubbling under that all the time and all the way through it was a growing love for Depeche Mode. And then in 1987 they dropped Music for the Masses, and that was it. They became the band for me. In 1990, Depeche Mode delivered Violator, which has become one of my two favourite albums of all time, the other being Songs of Faith and Devotion. However, Violator is, for my mind, the perfect synth pop album. It's just my opinion. I know I'll get crap for that, but it is just my opinion. I love it. I love it to pieces, and it is probably the most inspirational album I've heard. And if I was to pick any of the ones that I've mentioned on this video, it would be Violator. That is my Synthspiration. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Richard MacLemale, aka Budget Keyboardist. This is my Synthspirations video. Here's a super fast summary of me. I have 6 albums out under my own name. I'm working on a 7th. I run budgetguitarist.com and budgetkeyboardist.com websites and YouTube channels. My last album is called Attack of the 80s Synths, and it's 80s synth pop. It's available everywhere. I'm really into software synths because money. Okay. The first album that I owned that inspired me to get into synths was Styx Grand Illusion. I like the synth work that Dennis DeYoung did, and I really like that intro to Fooling Yourself a lot. I think he used the Oberheim 4 voice for that. Pretty sure. When the Cars' first album came out, I was really, really into it. And I think it was the first time that I heard lead synth lines in a song that were like melodic and catchy. Greg Hawkes was doing a lot of cool synth lines. And Greg used a bunch of synths on that album, a Mini Moog, ARP Omni, ARP Odyssey, and a Yamaha CS50, I believe. But it was Tony Banks who really inspired my love of synths more than anyone else. The 2 popular synth solos on The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway really blew me away, and of course those solos were In the Cage and Colony of Slippermen Part 1. I'm pretty sure both those solos were played on an ARP Pro Soloist. Years later, I played an ARP Pro Soloist in my college band, and quite frankly, I didn't like it much. Turns out it was the notes being played that were more important than the actual sound used. I also played a Rhodes and a Mini Moog, and I loved them both, except when the Moog jumped radically out of tune sometimes. I'd also have to mention The Golden Age of Wireless by Thomas Dolby as being super influential. I think She Blinded Me with Science was amazing. Now, from what I've read, on that album he used a Fairlight, a Moog modular synth, Roland Jupiter 8, Oberheim OBX-A, a PPG Wave, and a Prophet 5. I'm naming all these synths for a reason, which I'm going to get to in a minute. I was also a big fan of Howard Jones' that album Dream into Action. And according to my research, the list of synths on that album is also a star-studded lineup. Ready? Okay, Roland Juno 60, Roland Jupiter 8, Moog Prodigy, Yamaha DX7, Oberheim OBX-A, Prophet 5, Emulator 2. So why am I name checking all these synths? Here's why. If you add together the synths used by Thomas Dolby and Howard Jones, that list would look a lot like the Arturia V Collection. I bought V Collection 9 when it was on sale, and I absolutely love it. I also bought the Mercury 6 and the Quadra from Cherry Audio, and they're both great. When I was 21 years old, all I could afford was a DX27, TX81Z, Elisa's HR16 drum machine, Elisa's MMT sequencer, MMT8, sorry, and a Vestifier 4-track cassette. And while I loved that setup, it had serious drawbacks, such as the lack of a decent piano. These days I've got simulations of all these synths, keyboards, and drum machines that inspired me, but I've also got my Yamaha MX88 and my Behringer Poly D, which is amazing for the money. It's the best time ever to be a keyboard player on a budget. I think my next synth is going to be the Behringer Neptune 80 if they ever release it. Anyway, thanks for watching my Synthspirations video. And that's hard to say, Synthspirations.
Hello there. My name is Jeffery Dery. I am from Montreal, Canada. And I'd like to begin by wishing a happy 5th anniversary to PSN. And thank you for all the great content you've provided over the years. Very funny, very informative, well, mostly informative, because that's what the show's about. And I'm wishing you 50 more years to come of great shows. Now, as far as my Synthspirations, before I got into keyboards, I didn't like them. I kind of hated keyboards because they made bleep, bloop, bleep sounds. And for me, that was it. It was like bleep, bloop, and nothing. But then I remember the day, the exact day, the date, the time I got into them, because my girlfriend on my 16th birthday said, oh, there's a concert tonight, let's go there. I bought you tickets. I went like, all right, okay, cool, let's go. And then got into the concert hall, and there were 3 sets of keyboards on the stage. And I really wasn't happy, because keyboards on my 16th birthday? No, we could do something better on my 16th birthday. Anyway, so the show began, and I was like, all right, okay, there's a guitar. Okay, there's a guitar. That's good. There's a guitar. And then after maybe half an hour, I got into it. I said, okay, well, you can make music with keyboards. And it does, it's not just like something in the background. It's right in front of you. And it was this wonderful band, Saga, which I say is the best band in the world. They're not. They're the best band for me, but they're the ones who took me from not liking keyboards to liking keyboards. By the end of the show, I was totally sold. The next day, I bought their first 4 albums. And 2 weeks later, I bought my first keyboard. So is that inspired or what? Yeah, there we go. Anyway, their first album, this one, great one too. And then what else? After that, the great band, Asia. This had guitars too, and so that took me a little bit further into keyboard and what it could be done. Really great band. Love the band. And then, well, of course, if you were into keyboards, you'll get into Jean-Michel Jarre. That really gave me an idea of what can be done with just keyboards and how wide it could be. Really, it expanded my mind. The one that really expanded my mind. The Great Vangelis. The Great Vangelis. That album still, to this day, I listen to it and I'm still amazed. Everything is great. The movie without that music is not the same movie. It's not as good. The music alone is amazing. The music with the movie is a masterpiece. Yeah, so it got me into buying more keyboards, obviously, right? Just, and then I got into these guys called Delirium. Canadian band as well, like Saga. Canadian band who got me into a different kind of way of approaching keyboards and sounds and textures, and lots of textures in Delirium. There's like 4 albums that are really, really interesting. Spheres 1, Spheres 2. This one, Semantic Spaces and Karma, are really their top, in my opinion. And anyway, that's where we are. And thank you very much. And I wish everyone a very good day. Bye-bye.
Hello, and thanks for having me on the show. I got the Arranger keyboard out today, especially for you, Kent and Andrew, because I know how much you appreciate it. Anyway, Synthspiration. The first time I heard a synthesizer on a pop song, for me and millions of people around the world, it was probably this. Let's go up an octave. That was my first exposure to synthesizers. I remember learning how to play this from the sheet music on the piano as a very small kid. Fun fact, by the way, this song, Popcorn, is my most viewed video on YouTube. So that's how it all got started. And now, yeah, it's strange. Bit of a twist of fate or a coincidence there. Anyway, the next thing was songs like this. That was a huge inspiration to me and hundreds and thousands of other wannabe synthesists all around the world. Went something like this. Now the amazing thing about this song is it had 4 different sections. I was fascinated by all of them. That was the main riff, of course. Then you had the... If I play it right. Then there was the second part that went like this, or the third part. And that beautiful, like, climax to the song. Check this out. I got such a kick from playing that. And then, of course, closely followed up with this. Sorry for the wrong notes. Absolutely loved that stuff. Wow. And yeah, listen to those tracks today. That was Our Friends Electric and Cars by Gary Newman, Tubeway Army. Even today, they still sound super fresh and cool, which is unlike most stuff that was made at that time. This is the late 70s. I remember recording this. I didn't have these records myself. I would take a little mono cassette recorder and record it in from the radio and listen over and over again. But the main way I used to enjoy these songs, I remember going to Eddie Moore's Music in Bournemouth, and back in those times you could buy the top 40 hits as sheet music. Yeah, and I remember buying the sheet music for Cars and Our Friends Electric with my pocket money. Back in those days, yeah, this is kind of funny, but the pocket money that I got was just for practicing piano. If I practiced my piano lessons, then I got some pocket money. And also my parents would give me a treat. They'd give me a bottle of Guinness every week. Yeah, bit strange, but that's 70s parenting for you. Then we get stuff like this a little bit later. How would that go? It goes something like this. Heard this on the radio. Kraftwerk, The Model, a huge hit. It was #1 for weeks as far as I can remember. I just loved all of the riffs. hugely influential. Many Kraftwerk diehards will say they didn't like it because it was too commercial, a bit of a sellout. But for me, yeah, wow, absolutely beautiful. I just love these songs with powerful synth riffs. And then we have stuff like this, 4 Pretty Boys from London. How would that go? There we go. And of course, there we go. Yeah, so that was a huge influence as well. Then I started hearing songs like this. Let's go up an octave. My family were very supportive of me being a musician, and by this time we had a couple of synths in the house, an MS-20, Korg MS-20 and a Roland Juno 6. I remember playing all of these songs on those synths and having a blast. By the way, I still have them both, and I need to talk to you sometime about this, Kent, because both of those are back in the UK, but they haven't been powered on for 40 years. I don't quite know what to do with them. So yeah, I'd love to have a chat with you one day about that. Moving on, yes, finally then, this guy was a massive influence to me in the mid-80s. Not just the music, although that was a huge part of it, but the fashion, the hairstyle. Yes, I bleached my hair and spiked it up and tried to look a bit like him or copy the style fairly unsuccessfully. But we're talking about tracks like this. So the riff would be... And one of my favourite synth riffs of all time, check this out. And then it would answer on the other side of the stereo field. Then it would go down to this. So nice. Yeah. So nice. I had so much fun playing that riff for hours. We are talking, of course, about Howard Jones, a massive influence on me back in the day. I'll finish off with one final anecdote. I hope this hasn't gone on too long. I apologise, Robbie, if that's the case. Yeah, back in the day, I was 15, 14, something like that, and probably younger actually. But back in the UK, every classroom had a piano in the corner, an old beat up, upright piano. I was a kind of shy guy, but I remember once when there was a break between classes, probably a rainy day, so everybody was in the classroom, I shyly went over to the piano and started playing this kind of stuff, maybe some Michael Jackson. Something like that everybody recognised. And wow, the response I got from my classmates was amazing. And I realised I could do something that nobody else could do in the classroom. I was not by any means one of the cool kids, not particularly good looking, not good at sports, not very smart, kind of shy and quiet. But when I got to the piano, yeah, I got such a positive reaction from my classmates. It's just amazing. And that's what set me off really as a performer. It's something I've continued doing to this day. So yeah. Finally, before I go, I just want to say to Robbie, Kent, Andrew, thank you so much for everything that you do for this synth community. I love the show. You don't often see me in the chat because I typically listen on catch-up during the weekend. Yeah, I listen to the show as I'm doing my chores or going for a walk or something. But really, the show is one of the highlights of my week. So thanks very much for that. Cheerio.
Hello, everyone. I thought, seeing as we've got a lot of time to fill today, this is from the past. I did this a few hours before the show, and I thought it's probably about time I did my Synthspirations. And so I went through my record collection. I'd already started making notes, and I came out with a considerable pile of influences and inspirations. I know I'm going to have missed some really important stuff out. Maybe I can do a second one at some point, but this is it. I've committed. We're going to start. Hopefully this is kind of in a chronological order. Some of the things may be slightly out, but let's give this a go, shall we? Okay, right. So we're going to start off. This album has inspired me throughout my life. It's one of the, as far as I'm concerned, it's one of the greatest albums of all time, and it came out at the same time as, or around the same time as, Sgt. Pepper and Pet Sounds. So it's kind of, big, and it was this group's pinnacle. Some people would say their follow-up album was their pinnacle. I believe this is. And unbeknownst to the very young me at the time, so they were talking like the early 1970s when I first heard this, I didn't know what a synthesizer probably was, and I didn't know where they were being used. But as it turns out, the opening track of this album features a Moog modular, and the sound that Moog modular makes has always blown me away. The album is Simon & Garfunkel's Bookends. Obviously not a great candidate for an electronic music album, but Save the Life of My Child with that big booming Moog modular, it just did for me. It really did. It's a brilliant album anyway, but that was probably the first time I heard a synthesizer. I guess the next time I heard one and knew what it was and was completely blown away by it was this little thing here. This is Our Friends Electric by Tubeway Army. You mustn't say Gary Newman, it was Tubeway Army. And this, there's a long story behind this, and I'll try and keep this very short, but my dad owned a restaurant with another guy in the 70s, and we used to get picked up from school by either one of our fathers, me and this kid. And it just so happened that one day we got picked up by my dad's business partners, and he took us back to his place, and my dad would come and pick me up. But whilst I was waiting, my friend had an older sister who I had a bit of a crush on, if I'm being completely honest. Mainly because she was a little older, a little cooler, and she loved her music, and I did love my music too. And she put this record on, and it just blew me away. I remember sitting on her bedroom floor with Jason and Maria, and we were listening to this thing, and my mind was being blown by the song, the voice, the sounds, and I was so blown away by it. She said, "Just take the record. I'll buy another one." And this is that very record. And as you can see, it's very worn and very scratched, and even has a little chip out of the side, but I've kept it all these years. Obviously I've got the album, and but this is that moment. This is that very moment that blew me away, shall we say. So Our Friends Electric, and I think that probably goes for a lot of people, and as Gary says himself, he opened the door. Lots of people pushed through it, and he was just he was the first one to have a massive hit, and it kind of went on from there. So then I started to listen to more music with synthesizers. I kind of actively sought this stuff out, and one of the guys that I would listen to, without really knowing much about him and his work with Yellow Magic Orchestra, is Ryuichi Sakamoto. And what blows me away about this is Hidaru Yudo no Yume, I hope I've pronounced that right, Left-Handed Dream, as is known in the West. This is a reissue, this is a remastered version, and it sounds incredible. But the bizarre thing is, and this is the wonderful thing about this industry, Ryuichi had some cohorts on this album, and this guy here is Robin Scott. Robin Scott of M fame, pop music, and Robin is a friend of mine now, and it's amazing, this kind of little circles, or big circles. But I just love the whole Japanese feel, the mixture of Western and Eastern sounds and ideas and compositions. And so that was a big thing for me. Following on from that kind of Eastern influence was, of course, the great Vangelis. I was introduced to the China album by a friend of mine called Gordon Connolly. Gordon was the lighting and sound guy in the drama studio at high school, and I was a big drama kid, and we were putting on a performance of a play by, I think it was Edward Bond, called Narrow Road to the Deep North. And Gordon said to the drama teacher, this would make brilliant soundtrack for playing in the background. And when you put it on, I was just blown away. And again, I wasn't completely au fait with the instruments. I didn't realise, the CS80s and string machines and all sorts going on in there. But I fell in love with this album, and I remember borrowing it from the local library and taping it, and then eventually going out and buying my own copy, which is the original version you see there. So that's a massive thing, and I think most of us will have Vangelis in our libraries. Of course, I was really into the pop scene of the time, and I remember going to numerous school discos and other discos that we'd have around the locality. And one band stood out for me because their synthesizer sounds were not quite like everybody else's. Realizing later that a lot of the stuff that we were hearing was an early synclavier. Soft Cell, Non-Stop Erotic Cabaret is just a masterpiece in my opinion, and Dave Ball has just come up with some amazing stuff on there. And of course the follow-up sister album, which is soon to be re-released apparently, Non-Stop Ecstatic Dancing, with the mixes on, which was even better because all of those great songs you could hear in extra long versions. So yeah, Soft Cell, really real big influence on exploring sounds and stuff. The next album I've got that's a real big inspiration for me, both from synthesizers and from music. I'd never heard of Debussy until I heard this album, and I first heard stuff off this album on a radio show in the 70s in the UK on Radio 1, hosted by Dave Lee Travis. And he used to use arabesque as a musical bed for a feature. I can't remember what the feature was. And I always thought, that sounds like novelty, but I was always interested in those sounds and what they were. And then, again, I think it might have been my friend Gordon said, you need to listen to Snowflakes Are Dancing by Tomita. And, of course, this is a synthesizer nerd's dream, because not only is it amazing compositions by Debussy, but it's an amazing recording by Tomita. And, of course, he lists everything on the back as well, which is just great for us nerds, even though most of it is modular. But, yeah, I mean, for me, Claire de Lune is one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever written. And Tomita's version of it is just astounding. So, yeah, Tomita's Snowflakes Are Dancing, another great one. Going back to British synth pop, these boys, I think our friend Kissing the Machine, Sean, he highlighted this one. I've got 2 copies of this. I bought 2 copies. I don't know why. I think they're both okay, but I've got 2 of these. But this had messages on, and the Messerschmitt Twins and Julius Song and Electricity. And I just remember hearing these guys and seeing Andy McCluskey and his moves was, it was just great. I wanted to be OMD. I wanted to be a lot of bands or artists back in the day, and there's one coming up fairly soon that I really wanted to be. But OMD, big inspiration, because I think the thing that stuck out for me about OMD was their intros. The intros to a lot of their songs, mainly the singles, are very weird, very odd, and it's sort of like dissonance and noise, and then they go into it, and I don't know if that's a deliberate thing. It must be. I don't know. It just sounded great. Right, moving on. This one was, I again used to lose my collective crap over this on the dance floor in the school discos, but I remember seeing them play on Top of the Pops, and there's a duo, and one half of the duo had a SH-101 slung around his neck, and I thought, that's cool. It's like a small keyboard playing it like a guitar with this grip on the end, and he was playing chords on it, and I didn't realise at the time that this was a monophonic synth, and I thought, I've got to have one of those. And I remember seeing the advert in the the press at the time with a young boy about my age with one of these strapped over his shoulder. I was like, I've got to have one. Still don't own an original one. That's that's something I'm still working towards. But the song was the brilliant Arthur Baker remix of IOU by Freeze. I latterly got into Southern Freeze, who were the original band, and then these guys split off. But yeah, and this got me into the whole world of electro as well. The whole electro scene with Arthur Baker and Jelly Bean and all that stuff. So that's massive for me. I still, when I hear that, if I hear that anywhere, it's just infectious, brilliant stuff. And I always thought they were American. They're not, the two English guys. Brilliant song. The next band, and I've picked out 4 particular things. So massive, again, massive for me, and still are to this day. Particularly, well, you'll see who it is. Human League. So this is the Dignity of Labour on the Fast Records label. There it is there, and this is the one. This is for all you record collecting nerds. This is the version that comes with the infamous flexi disc, which is great fun to listen to. But yeah, the Dignity of Labour, all of that early Human League stuff, Being Boiled, Empire State Human, the Black Hit of Space. Just great. Really cool stuff. Of course, the albums were not too shabby at all. Of course, we've got Reproduction and Travelogue, which are just 2 epic pieces of British electronica that are essential, absolutely essential listening. Not wanting to gloss over those, they are fantastic, but of course everyone does remember that Dare. And what I should have brought in was League Unlimited, Love and Dancing as well. But Dare was a pivotal moment in British electronic pop music, and this whole album is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So yeah, Human League, and of course Heaven 17 afterwards. You mustn't forget them, because they kind of carried on their path and still going today. And I'm going to see them in, I don't know, is it July? I think again. I've seen them so many times. They are brilliant. 1983 was a great year for influential music for me, not least because of this one. This is one of a number of copies that I've got. This is one with a die cut sleeve. It's not an original first pressing, but it's a pretty recent, pretty early one, before they stopped die cutting, because apparently they were losing money on the sleeve. But this is, if you don't know what this is, shame on you. But I'll tell you, it's Blue Monday, New Order. What can you say? New Order. Just masters of what they do, and this had me thinking, how are they doing that? How are they making these noises? And would put me on the path to learn. And of course, once I got into this, I had got into everything else, and kind of rediscovered. I'd heard Joy Division, and wasn't too. I wasn't mature enough. My ear wasn't mature enough at that time, but they were on my radar. And it was an eye-opening. We used to have massive discussions. I remember there's this kid at school. We had massive discussions about how they got those sounds. Not least Hookie's bass. So yeah, this talking's thirsty work. So anyway, another great thing that happened in 1983, which still resonates with me today, is this album. And if I was to sort of implore that you have one album in your collection, it's Malcolm McLaren's Duck Rock. It's, I don't know, it's one of those records you can't describe. You have to listen to it. It's just full of great stuff. But of course, this was an early use of the Fairlight, and you heard all of these amazing sounds in there. And of course, it was made by JJ, Gary, and Dudley was in on it as well. Thomas Dolby played on this album, and Malcolm kind of directed, and Trevor produced, and it is a stunning masterpiece. Reissued not that long ago on heavyweight vinyl for the first time in decades, and I'm just hoping that somebody does a deluxe box set of this at some point, and includes all the 12 inches and all the remixes, and also the amazing Duck Rock video album, where they made a video for the entire album. Every song gets a look in there. It's just fantastic. And of course, it led to a band that are very close to my heart, The Art of Noise. This was Into Battle With, and of course the full album, Who's Afraid Of. These are just, I mean, this and a couple of other records, the next one in particular, really got me into the Fairlight and sampling, and just, again, this voyage of sonic discovery. To be able to have spoken to JJ is a great honour, and to understand, you know, kind of a little bit about what went on. But they fascinated me, not just the records, but the label, ZTT. Absolutely fascinated me. The sleeve notes by Paul Morley, the artwork, the music. There's a brilliant box set called And What Have You Done With My Body, God? And it's basically a Fairlight demo box set. It's brilliant. 50 odd tracks of early Art of Noise. It's superb. I highly recommend it. But of course, the other album that really sold me on sampling was Zuluk. This is the recently reissued 40th anniversary version, which has an extra track on and is completely new mastering, so they tell me. But this was brilliant. I mean, I'd always been into Ger, as I think most of us synthy nerds have, and Zuluk was just incredible, because he really took sampling and did some amazing things with it, made instruments from sounds that, you know, shouldn't make instruments, but he did. It's a brilliant album. Another one of his that I do have to mention is Houston Leon, the live shows. I had this originally on cassette and then bought this on vinyl, and it's an incredible mix of live ambience and the music and the radio and people talking and chattering in the background. It's a really cool album. One of my favourite Ger albums, if I am honest. 83 going to 84. So I'm trying very hard to keep this on track. This blew me away for two reasons. Three reasons. Number one, I love the guy's fashion. Number two, I loved the song because it was completely electronic and really upbeat and uplifting. And of course, on the cover was this thing, the Jupiter 8. And I remember looking at that, and I think there's a lot of people my age or this era that looked at that and thought, I can wear this, okay, and if that gets me that, yeah. But I remember seeing that and thinking, that's a proper synthesizer. So that's my original 12-inch of new song bought back in the day. All of these, I think, pretty much are original purchases. But yeah, Howard Jones. And of course, the subsequent album is a masterpiece in electronic music. One-man band type stuff. It's a lot of that stuff he did in his live shows on his own. He's obviously had the luxury of the studio to make it easier. It was one of the first albums that introduced me to the DX7 with the bass. Throughout that, you know, the bass is pretty much all DX7 and other things besides. But that just blew my socks off. And the 12-inch version of What Is Love is a beautiful thing, because it's basically the song played twice. First time with the lyrics, the second time without. So you can really listen to the mix and the instrumentation, which is really good. Now, this album isn't distinctly electronic, but it has synthesizers in it. He was a guest recently on Sonic State. I've interviewed him before for Sound on Sound. Mike Lindup of Level 42, and the other member of the band, who is often called, you know, the fifth member, Wally Badaru, I can't remember how to pronounce it properly. But this was littered with Fairlight DX7, Prophet 5, Synclavier, and some of the sounds in this. I was talking to Paulie the other day. We were sort of talking about some of the sounds and where they came from. Some really good stuff on there. And it left me in a position where I loved Phil Gould because I was a drummer and I loved Phil. But I also loved the whole slap bass thing. Really got into that. And so I really wanted to be a bass player as well. And then it was hearing Mike's keyboard work and Wally's programming made me think, oh God, there's three things I want to be. I remember watching Level 42 live at Wembley. I had the VHS cassette and I wore it out mainly because I was going backwards and forwards and pausing it, checking out Mike Lindop's rig. And that's why I have things like KX88s and TX816s and DX7s and QX1s. It's because of that. It's because those were the keyboards being used by one of my favourite keyboard players of all time. So, yeah, Level 42. I think we're almost halfway through. Yeah, something like that. We're eating up a lot of time here. So I'll thank me later. This was another album that I played to death. This is Into the Gap by Thompson Twins. Loads of Oberheim, loads of Movement Drum Computer, loads of Prophet 5, some great songs. And I used to really upset my late father. My parents divorced. My father would come and pick me and my sister up for weekends, and all the way from Suffolk to Norfolk and back again, 2 days later, it would just be Into the Gap on repeat. And I had the extended cassette version, which had the album on one side and then 7 or 8 dub mixes on the other side. So it went on, and as soon as it finished, flip it over, start again. It's a brilliant album. I actually painted that logo on my wall. I was such a fan. Proper big thing, big mural. Still an amazing album to this day, and still sounds fantastic. Right, I think we are at the halfway point, and this is a good time to talk about this album, because in my opinion it is one of the greatest albums of all time in terms of its composition, its arrangement, its instrumentation, its production. Everything about this album is perfect. There's nothing on this album, not even the artwork or anything, that is not the most immaculate thing ever created musically. Scritti Politti's Cupid Psyche 85. The soundtrack for my 1985 basically is summer in Italy, back home with the family. This on my Walkman, walking up and down mountains. I think I probably had a failed relationship at school that I was trying to get over. This just spoke to me in every single possible way, and has been the benchmark for everything that I've tried to do musically. I always aim for that clarity, that precision. And having spoke with and now sort of good friends with Dave Gamson, learning about how this was made and the trials and tribulations, particularly with its follow-up Provision, which is even better in terms of its kind of mechanical precision. What was amazing about this was that MIDI was barely used. This was all done like at half speed and then sped up again just to get that sort of timing exactly right. But for me, Green Gartside, Dave Gamson, Fred Marr, that little trio, that version of Scritti, and these two albums that they made, just the very pinnacle. But this one, undoubtedly one of the greatest albums of all time, in my humble opinion. In terms of production and use of technology, this next one is preceding another Trevor Horn, actually 2 or 3 Trevor Horn productions, but this is Grace Jones' Slave to the Rhythm, the album, which finishes with the big one. I think the 12-inch mix of this, Blooded, I think it's called, is probably the greatest pop production song of all time. It's just exquisite. Everything about it is, the imperfection makes it perfect. The imperfection of that drum loop is just ever so slightly out, but the way that Stephen Lipson synchronized those 2 Sony digital tape decks, just incredible. This is it's not one you can easily get into because it's basically the same song done in 8 different ways, but it's just brilliant. And the artwork and Grace, everything about it. But another big album for me in 85, and still is a masterpiece, full of wonderful synthesizers, is Frankie Goes to Hollywood's Welcome to the Pleasure Dome. And this is the copy that at aged 15, I think I was, or was I 16? I can't remember now. I went to a high school just up the road here, and it's a good half an hour's walk into the town centre. And I made it just in time. I went down, and the week this was released, bought this from Woolworths for however much it was, and played it in the common room at school. And we all gathered because it was just they were such a phenomenon, and we didn't get to listen to the whole thing straight away. But my word, I mean, the opening track, the title track is just still absolutely immaculate. Yeah. So Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Who would know that I would actually own one of their synthesizers at one point? Another one to come out of ZTT was, of course, Propaganda's A Secret Wish. This is, again, another piece of great production. Trevor executive produced this. He oversaw Lippo doing this. But it is just a fantastic album, and I've had the great pleasure of seeing Claudia and Suzanne, or maybe Claudia on her own, performing all of these songs live in more recent years. Claudia's got a new album coming out soon, but yeah, Propaganda's Secret Wish, just the use of the synclavia and that whole kind of Trevor Horn team production is fantastic. This, again, I can't explain how important this album is to me, because again, when I first heard it, it got me really inquisitive about synthesizers again, and the songs were great. They resonated with me. It felt like London. This album felt like it was the soundtrack of London, and that was probably a very personal thing, and probably attached to the first big single they had. It's Pet Shop Boys, Please. I could listen to this from beginning to end and just regress to where I was when this came out and how I felt and what I was doing. All I wanted to do was run away to the big city, and this was the sound of the big city. This was the sound of London. That's all I ever wanted to do, and I did it, and I came home because it wasn't quite. It was a little bit of a Dick Whittington moment. The streets weren't all paved with gold. Another one of theirs that I have to mention is this, which is Introspective. This is a real favourite of mine because this is the edition that is released as 3 12-inches. So it's a 6-track album, and everything's on the 12-inch singles. It sounds amazing. But Introspective was probably as impactful as Please to me. So I just thought I'd throw that in as a quick mention. Next band, I'll start off in the chronological order. Well, actually, no, because that Please was 86. This is 85, and again, just another epic album. Brilliant use of synthesizers, but a much more rockier album than The Hurting, which was more of a synthy album. But Tears for Fears were never really a synth band, and they stayed at a lot. But Songs from the Big Chair is just a massive record, both in its its sound and its importance. So yeah, Tears for Fears need to get a mention. So I've kind of limited myself to those that kind of takes me up to the age of around sort of 16, 17, and these records that really just shaped what I listened to and how I made my music, and that's really what Synthspirations is kind of all about. But I did want to give credit to much more recent acts that have made me, when I've listened to their stuff, they've made me go, oh God, that's so good. How could I even possibly get close to that? And then very quickly after, well, let me have a go. One of those acts is Underworld, who consistently to this day make some of the most amazing electronic music that works in a club environment and also at home when you just got it on, and it's just, it infiltrates you in such a way. And Dark and Long, it's just one of my favourite pieces of music ever. So yeah, Dub No Bass from my Head, man, is probably one of my favourite Underworld albums, although their recent stuff is just brilliant. Another one that you may not have heard of, but is again very important to me, is The Range. This album, which was called Potential, the whole concept of this album was that the guy who is the ranger, whose name escapes me at the moment, went on to YouTube and tried to pick out people singing their own songs a cappella. You know, these just people that have got a song, they've written it down, they're just going to sing it and put it out there on YouTube. And he found these vocalists, most of them here in the UK, and then contacted them and said, "Look, I'd like to make a song around your vocal, and would you mind?" And of course, I think pretty much everyone he approached said yes. And potential is an album of all of those songs, and it's brilliant. It's so good. It just made me think, yeah, here's a different way of doing stuff. Here's a very clever way of doing stuff. And the music reminded me of someone who has and continues to be a big influence on me musically, and everything that they release makes me try and do something like it, and I never get close. Burial. These are the only 2 albums he's ever released, but and they're at least 10 to 15 years old now. Jeez. But he still puts out a lot of stuff on 12-inch, and every now and again he'll release something. Burial, to me, blows my mind. I have to thank Azio Head for turning me on, because we were having a conversation about dubstep, and he said, yeah, this dubstep stuff that everyone's talking about, it's not proper, original. You need to listen to Burial. I was like, who's Burial? And he educated me. And I often think that those kind of referrals from people you know and trust musically, as I do, but are very important and should be listened to. So yeah, Burial is still to this day one of my modern influences. Now I realise I've been going for about half an hour, and I'm sorry, but hopefully that's entertained you. And thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and don't forget to send your Synthspirations in. I'm sure that when I finish this I will come on later, probably wearing the same t-shirt, and implore you to send me in your Synthspirations. Maybe some of that stuff has inspired you to do a Synthspirations video. Please do send it in to us, prosynthnetwork@gmail.com, or rob@prosynthnetwork.com. That works now. So please do send those in, and I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that resonated with a bunch of you, and I keep thinking to myself that you should all know that stuff. But I'm guessing there's going to be a few people watching the show that may not have seen some of those or heard some of those. So go out and listen to them, and then you'll know what kind of got me going. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye.
Hi, my name's Ger, and welcome to my version of Synthspirations. So where to start? Well, I remember back, I suppose the earliest time when I was about 10 years old, and I was in the back of a friend's car, and we were driving along, and his dad put on a tape. Remember those things? And then this sound just came out of the speakers, and I'd never heard anything like it. And it was actually Donna Summer with I Feel Love. Wow, the Moog sound, or say Moog sound, was just incredible. I just didn't know what it was, but at 10 I had to find out. So after that, the first electronic music album I ever bought was Jean-Michel Jarre's Oxygen. Not again. Sorry about this. Would you be quiet? Thank you. You can't mention JMJ without, the MS kicking off. Right, so where was I? Okay. Wow. Just the sounds, the production, the panning of effects, just took me and transported me just to a different place. I actually wore that tape out where I actually had to save up and buy another copy. The next one on my list would have been Kraftwerk's Autobahn, with its, mechanical and futuristic sound. And it just painting a landscape just using electronic instruments was just brilliant. I couldn't get over how they were making car sounds with synths. And then I just had to find out more about them, and you just end up buying every single album belonged to them, because they were such innovators. So, as I got older, when punk landed, I was the odd kid in the corner listening to bleeps and bloops and pads and whooshes, until one fateful night when Tubeway Army landed on top of the pops, with their alien-looking frontman, Mr. Gary Newman, performing Our Friends Electric. What an incredible sound. And the dystopian landscape they created was just brilliant. It was right up my street. So the next album was less about instrumentals and more about songwriting and just the craft of writing a song, and that was Humans Lib by Howard Jones. And the sounds he used to get out of Jupiter 8, I was so jealous. It was just pure gear envy. Why couldn't I have his rig? I was always into sci-fi programs and all that. And when I saw the movie Blade Runner, I was blown away with the story and the visuals. But that soundtrack by Vangelis was a marriage made in heaven. I could listen to that thing forever. The things he made a CS80 do, and the concepts, brilliant. I used to read a magazine, well, remember magazines, Electronic Soundmaker, and it used to come with an actual tape cassette. You know, and had demos of the gear and artist interviews. And included in August of 85, on that edition, was a track by Mark Shreve called Storm Column. And the sampling, the whole thing, I never heard anything like it. And I was just, what is this and how can I do it? And it's very sad to see that he's not with us anymore. So, being into sound and making sounds and mixing sounds, a good friend of mine, another sound engineer, back in the day, just kind of went, you know, do you want to hear some serious production? And he handed me a copy of an album. And I'm sorry to say, it's poppy, but production was the album Bangs and Crashes by Go West. And it's just so much sampling and ear candy and production and panning, and it just took me to somewhere where we went, that was great. How can I do that? So speaking of sampling, the next one, which I know Robbie's already mentioned, is another album by Mr. Ger, the incredible Zuluk. What can you say? Making collages into music. And how do you make an elephant roar into music? Now, when something really kicked off, not a copyright strike. What could you say? When I heard what Liam from The Prodigy was doing on that album, Experience, with their single, Charlie, it was just sampling mayhem, and it was my version of punk. Another one, because I seem to be down the sampling route, which is just another album that just, I just listened to it again and again and again. It was basically from the masters of sampling, The Art of Noise, and their album, The Seduction of Claude Debussy. And it's just that whole mix of live instruments, electronics, styles of music, just taking Debussy to a new level. Every track is a lesson in production from the best in the game. So, I'll have to stop here. There's just so many great electronic albums. I could go on forever. But this is just my small attempt at it. I hope you enjoyed it. It's quite simple. For all the guys in ProSynth Network, keep up the good work.
Go on.
I'll make you an offer. If you can give me a little bit of a break so I can run through to the other room and grab records off a shelf, I'll do it live.
Oh, now that would be a first on the show.
And
that would
unscripted.
Live unscripted.
Go on then.
Go.
Right, I'll go and get them. Right, okay, bye.
Go and get them. Go and get them. So what are we going to see here, Ken?
I have no idea.
So he's back. And now I'm going to wonder what he's going to do. So are we going to throw the floor over?
I think we are.
to Mr. Brooks. Mr. Brooks, are you
Hello.
doing the very first Synthspirations here on the PSN?
Live, without a safety net.
No retakes?
Yes. No retakes, no nothing, no, oh dear. I ought to try and put them down to some kind of sensible chronological order, shouldn't I? Which
well, you see when you want to do it, you say.
Yeah.
And then we'll just give you the floor.
Right. There, I think we'll do them like that, and then that's there. And yeah.
And are you ready?
Right. I think I'm ready.
Oh.
Here we go. So, ladies, gentlemen, and Steve, the bastard from Australia, here, please do give a sound round of applause to Andy Brooks and his live, first ever live, Synthspirations.
Right, I've been meaning to do this for ages, actually, just never got round to it because I'm a lazy git, right? I've said it in public now. My other T-shirt says "Procrastinators of the world unite tomorrow." That's me. Some of this I've actually said on streams before, so I will be repeating a little bit. In the early 80s, early to mid 80s, really, I was very, very heavily into classical music and didn't really listen to anything but classical music. And a friend of mine came round one day and said, I'm sick of listening to classical music at your house. I brought a tape. And he put a tape on, stuck it into the National Panasonic Music Centre in our front room. And it was a cassette that he'd called Six of the Best, which, as grammar school boys, made me chuckle. You know, I thought that was funny. And it was 6 Ultravox songs, mid-Ewer generation Ultravox. I will hasten to add nothing against John Fox, but it was the mid-Ewer. And it was basically taken from mostly the live album Monument. But I really got into it, and Dancing with Tears in My Eyes was out in the charts at the time, and I bought the album called Lament. But the album that really, really, really sealed it for me with Ultravox, and I still think is one of the greatest albums of all time, is Rage in Eden. And there's not a dud track on it. It's fantastic. It's one of those albums that just doesn't get mentioned, really. The best of the 1980s. Nobody ever mentions Rage in Eden. It's a masterpiece. I absolutely adore it from beginning to end. That got me interested. I was thinking, Ultravox, I can play keyboards. I'm a pianist. I can play keyboards. Synthesizers, they've got keyboards. Yeah. So that was what made me. I sort of pestered my dad, and eventually he succumbed. And my first synthesizer was a Krumar Multiman S. Bloody massive, great, everything. But it made the sort of sounds that you could hear on Ultravox records. Those string sounds. They were using an Elka Rhapsody, I think, but it's similar sort of sound. So that was it, and that was me bitten by the bug then, and I've been into synthesizers ever since. The next sort of thing which happened was really, I mean, I was listening to lots of other things like Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark and Depeche Mode, and I love Depeche Mode, but as Matt did a lot of stuff on Depeche Mode and really sort of nailed that, I'm going to go with the next one. I really got into Jean-Michel Jarre, and it was this album for me, if I've got it the right way up. Let's get the right way up. Les Concerts en Chine, Concerts in China. I just absolutely love this, and I do think it's got Jean-Michel Jarre's best piece of music. It's got Arpeggiateur on it, Arpeggiator, which I just love. I think this is a stonking record. I really do. This one's probably unlistenable these days. It's been played so much. It wasn't just, pure Jean-Michel Jarre and electronica like that. I was into like synth pop, but one record in particular which really, really just made me go, oh, these things are amazing. This is great. And an insight into production values as much as anything else, not just the sounds, but how you put things together, was perhaps one of the first remix albums ever. I just think this is an amazing. I'd rather listen to this than Dare, for example. I'd rather put this on. It's just so much more interesting. I just love it. That for me is a classic as well. At the same time, I was getting into a lifelong love, which has never ever gone away. I got really interested in reading the sort of magazines and the press and Sound on Sound and Music Technology magazine and Electronics and Music Maker, if you remember that thing. And that's what really made me aware of the band Tangerine Dream. I hadn't heard much of them before. So my first Tangerine Dream album was not on CD, it was an album, but it was this one, Rubicon. My first Tangerine Dream album, and the one which is still my favourite to this day. This is the one that I listen to more than any other. I just think it's just that essence of the 1970s Tangerine Dream sound, and it is stunning. Ambient, sequencer driven, all the great big moogs coming in and out, and I just think it's stunning. But I will give an honourable mention to Ricochet as well, because the sequencer work on this is just sublime. Right, that sort of brings us a little bit later, and reading an interview with a chap called Daniel Lanois in Sound on Sound magazine, and the work he'd done in the studio with various people. But it made me go, I want to go and get that. And this became the introduction to, again, another of my real loves, and it's the soundtrack to Birdie by Peter Gabriel. This was my first Peter Gabriel album. I bought this because of the work that Daniel Lanois had done on soundscapes and the textures, and again, it's an ambient masterpiece. Keep using that word a lot, don't I? But I love this, and from there, that's when I started getting into listening to Peter Gabriel 3, Peter Gabriel 4, and other Peter Gabriel albums. I mean, by this time, So was in the charts, Sledgehammer and those things. But this, to me, is the beautiful period of Peter Gabriel, and it was this record that really got me into that, and the appreciation of effects, studio effects, as sound creation tools, not just something to make things sound nice. A skill I've never fully mastered. As somebody who works very closely with a sound engineer who's brilliant at effects processing, I realise how lacking I am, in spite of the fact that this album really was an inspiration. So then things changed, and whilst at this point I'd still got a number of synthesizers and drum machines and a 4-track tape recorder, and was making tunes. I'd even got an Atari ST and was sequencing things. It was building up. I then had to go and live in Germany, and I got into and I started enjoying some of the sort of house tunes that had been coming out and acid house. But it was when I was in Germany, 1989, that a friend played me, again, from a cassette, the album which changed it all for me. That album, 808 State 90, was like, oh my word, what? And I became a huge fan of 808 State and really got into techno as a genre and other sort of aspects. And that to me was that kicked me off in that particular track. The last my voice is going now. The last album I'm going to put up, I'm not putting up anything current or modern. This again goes back 30 years really. Is a masterpiece, again, if there's that word again, of the industrial EBM genre, because I just love it. It's just great. And I'm going to go and see them next week here in Sheffield. Frontline Assembly, Tactical Neural Implant. I love that. There are loads of records I could have chosen, loads of things I could have put in, but I've distilled it down to the ones that actually have had an impact on me and how I make music, music that's taken me down different paths and that sort of thing. Even music that's inspired, equipment choices and things. So that's really it from me. What I would say now is I don't listen to an awful lot of sort of commercial music. Nearly all of my music listening these days is done from Bandcamp, from people who I've met online, people through our own community who've put their music up there, and that's been another really wonderful thing. I mean, I'll give an example. I don't know if he's in the chat tonight. I hope he is. That's David Surchek, Asaph Stripe. I absolutely adore what he does. And of course, other people that we know, like James Glue, his albums, they're brilliant, just really, really good, well worth listening to. But that's it for me. That's my Synthspirations, and over and out.
Woo! First live Synthspiration. Andy, that was masterful. That was masterful. There's some great comments. You did a great job. Ken, any thoughts on that? What before I go to any of the comments?
Seeing that list, I now know. It just confirms why I loved him in the first place.
Yeah.
Because it's yes,
there we go.
Yes,
the
yes, like that.
Is a go to electronic music. One of my top 5 favourites of all time. The
Yeah,
Thin Wall is fantastic.
is absolutely great. Again, fabulous.
And then there we go.
Yeah,
Reproduction is that's another good album. This is interesting. I hadn't thought of doing it this way before, but always listen to Birdie after Kate Bush, Hounds of Love. I didn't get on with Birdie the first time round. I bought it, didn't get on with it, and it took me a few years to get back to it. And I have to say, I do love it a lot, but I've not listened back to back. So that's going to be Set High Hedron.
It's one of those. It's one of those records that you can go back to and listen to and just go, this is just gorgeous. I could have put Hounds of Love in, but I love it not as a synthy kind of album, even though it is obviously very sample driven. But anyway, so the Hounds of Love and Kate Bush could easily have gone in there. As could a ton of other records, of course.
And then Wagyu.
Finally, Schlager. Schlager. You want honestly, Wagyu Schlager. How can the country that gave us Brahms and Beethoven and Kraftwerk and Tangerine Dream give us something that is utterly dreadful? Honestly,
I was going to say, what about the Buzz Bomb?
Saturday night on German television. Oh Lord, it was just horrific. Anyway, yeah, Schlager, yes.
And then the last one for the moment is this, Gary,
yeah.
Lovely, some FLA, yeah. Some great choices there. Some really, really good choices. That was a really good Synthspirations, and that's got me thinking.
I see what Goose just said, and then I said, then I moved to Germany and really got into Schlager. No, actually, thanks, Wagyu. No, I didn't.
With me being the younger guy in the group, I was born in 1981 after a lot of these changes took place. Yes was my dad's all-time favorite band, but the group disbanded the year I was born. Now, Genesis was his second favorite band, but they changed their sound the year prior. This is where Jethro Tull comes in, which replaced Genesis as his second favorite group. Of course, there was stuff like War and Tom Waits, Kate Bush, who we all loved, but I didn't really hear much of their stuff around the house back then. As the music changed, my parents both followed along with it, and a lot of what I heard was stuff like Rick Wakeman and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, who also disbanded in the late 70s. So here are the ones that are most prevalent in my memory. Now, this is a record that I always saw around the house, so even though Jethro Tull changed their sound around this time, it was something that my parents enjoyed because it was something that they listened to on a regular basis. Now, this was one of my dad's favorite Genesis albums, and even though I can't recall any particular track, he used to play it all the time, so I figured I'd mention that one too. Gentle Giant was also another favorite of my father's, and you could tell that this was his copy because of the condition that it's in. One of the interesting things about this record is that it was later sampled by MF Doom, and I actually posted that music video on my channel the other day. Another favorite of my father's was Yes Songs, and you could tell that this was his record because of the condition it's in. And yeah, used to hear this a lot, and this is before they broke up. Now, these two were a couple of my dad's favorite Yes records that we used to hear around the house all the time, Close to the Edge and Tales from a Topographic Ocean. This one is familiar to most of you guys, and Friends of Mr. Cairo is the first living memory I have of music. Speaking of John Anderson, I always thought that Friends of Mr. Cairo song was on animation because the cover was also etched into my memory. This one came out in 1982, and the standout song for me is Boundaries. Robbie flashed this album during his Synthspirations episode, but the cover is different. It's a promotional copy, and somebody told me that this cover was used for one of their singles. Then Yes got back together and made their first commercial hit. Owner of the Lonely Heart was such a huge record. There were a couple explosive songs on the album, and my folks played the hell out of it. Even though it was a complete deviation from their older stuff, a lot of people embraced the change. A couple years later came an even bigger album with songs from The Big Chair. Shout was a huge song, but Everybody Wants to Rule the World really defined the 80s. I used to ride my bike around listening to this on a Walkman. Now that same year came another monumental record from the 80s. You know, the two records that really put a pin on 80s music is this one and the Tears for Fears album. Do I really need to say anything about this record? Now, this was also the year that brought us John Anderson's Christmas album, 3 Ships. I grew up with this being played every year as a Christmas tradition. Things really started to change after this. My parents were no longer together and we moved around for a couple years. For my birthday, my dad sent me a remote control car and Big Generator on cassette. Now, I really tried to love this record, but my tastes were beginning to radically shift during this time. Genesis got back together and put out Invisible Touch, which completely overshadowed Yes in their efforts. Okay, one of the reasons for this hard edit, change in view and tone and voice is because we just pulled this record today just in time to include it here. When we came back to Phoenix, this was the first piece of music my father shared with me. He played the record and I loved it so much he bought the cassette for my Walkman. This album marks a significant turning point because it's the last of really good 80s music that I listened to. This is where it all changed for me. Although synthesizers were still around, they weren't around as much as keyboards, neither made much of a difference from that era anyway. And the most noteworthy change for me came with this album right here. Although I don't have the vinyl yet, I first acquired this album on cassette and have the CD floating around here somewhere. With this cassette tape, more specifically the title track, I discovered what type of music I wanted to produce as an artist. My perception of hip-hop was more focused on New Jack Swing, and this style opened me up to a whole new era. When we finally got cable, I discovered a bunch of artists through Yo MTV Raps. It quickly went from MC Hammer to groups like Public Enemy and Digital Underground. By this time, it seemed to me like synths were becoming a thing of the past. And just like that, synthesizers were back, and in hip-hop production too. Now, this is the record that changed the entire music industry. Anthony Marinelli did a couple of videos on this album going through some of the synths and the melodies used. It's really interesting. You guys should check it out when you get a chance. While they were starting to be used before this, sampling funk and soul records is one thing, but to grab the actual synthesizers used to play a unique melody to go along with the production, this was something else entirely. When that second video hit and Dr. Dre revealed Funkadelic on his t-shirt, I really started researching the music. By the time that third single hit, I had done a little bit of research and was familiar with a few of the samples. So I started getting into funk, soul, and even some jazz. Now this Snoop Dogg record was even more dynamic. George Clinton was actually on the introductory song. I couldn't believe it. One of my favorite songs on this record was actually removed due to copyright infringement and is now back after 30 years. What happened was the record label didn't want to pay the money for sample clearances, but now that Snoop Dogg himself owns the label, it's back on the album. The song in question is Isaac Hayes' The Look of Love. There was even more synthesis used on the Doggy Style album, which led me backwards in discovering all sorts of music. It wasn't long before I started experimenting with psychedelics and listening to music like Pink Floyd. Now this era in my life led me to the Doors, and I spent my high school years listening to just about everything. I actually got to see George Clinton perform on more than one occasion. I also saw Primus live, which brought me to the Brown album. I started going to huge rave parties in the late 90s, and that's where I discovered jungle, drum and bass, and other awesome music that exclusively used hardware synthesizers. Keep in mind that I was also a hip-hop MC at the time, so I would spend hours rapping to all this music during the house parties. A lot of my friends were DJs, so I also did a few raves too. Now back then I would collect hip-hop instrumentals, jungle and drum and bass beats, you know, stuff that I could use at house parties and for mixtapes. Hip-hop was a huge factor at raves, which made for some pretty interesting music. Ice Cube's cousin Del the Funky Homo Sapien was quickly becoming one of my favorites. Here's another couple records that I used to own that were later digitized. This is Ming and FS Hell's Kitchen from 1999. These guys do jungle, drum and bass, and hip-hop with real instrumentation. It's really awesome. I got to see them live after I finished my first studio album. This one here is Deeper Concentration. It's part 2 of a series, and what it is a whole collection of DJs and MCs. You got Mixmaster Mike, Beat Junkies, all kinds of electronic music producers. This is a perfect example of the stuff that I used to collect on vinyl, and Adam F. here actually made a really awesome drum and bass album in 1997. Now, after the Both Sides of the Brain album, Del the Funky Homo Sapien teamed up with Dan the Automator and DJ Kid Koala for what I feel is the absolute best concept album in hip-hop history. This is actually the instrumental version of the album. Now, while I was listening to this album, there was the psychedelic progressive rock band Ween, who also released that year. Now, White Pepper is Ween's 7th album, and it sounded a bit more progressive than its predecessors. It still had that analog psychedelic tone, which was perfect for my father. He became an immediate fan after listening to this album, and so did my mom. As a matter of fact, if you're unfamiliar and enjoy some of these older prog records, you would really love Ween, especially their album The Mollusk. Not too long after the Deltron 3030 album, Gorillaz debuted in 2001, and this group quickly became my favorite. Not only was it the exact fusion of everything I was listening to at the time, but their breakout song actually featured my favorite rapper, which just happens to be Del the Funky Homo Sapien. This was the same year my oldest son was born, and I began to produce my own music rather than simply rap over other people's beats. Next to Del the Funky Homo Sapien, Aesop Rock is my second favorite MC, and this album really stood out to me. Now, another honorable mention here is Radiohead. While I haven't procured any of their vinyl yet, their production style has also been a huge influence. Another thing I want to share with you guys is this drone record that recently came out a few years ago, and we actually looked it up, and this guy is local over here. So for all those wondering why we randomly select BPM range between 60 and 200, this is why. This is why I produce in just about every genre, and why I'm so crass with an urban dialect. Now, I may have been born after a time when things changed with a lot of these bands that my parents listened to, but I got to listen to those growing up as well, so that was my major synth influence until gangster rap, and then that changed everything. Went to the rave stuff, and then the rest is history. So there you have it, folks. Viral beats, Synthspirations. Take care, everybody.
This is my story of how synthesizers led me to my favorite bands from many different genres, all linked together by an extremely versatile technology. My love of synths wasn't something that happened suddenly. It took a long time for me to understand or even care what a synthesizer was. Growing up, the first few CDs that I fell in love with were Third Eye Blind's self-titled album and Blink-182's Dude Ranch and Enema of the State. I'm going to spend way too much time on Blink-182, but they truly were the start of my unknown love for synths. I definitely didn't know it at the time, but a huge part of why I loved the sound of Enema is because of the fullness and atmosphere provided by the hidden synth textures. I've come to learn that Blink's producer Jerry Finn was a master at this. A great example is the organy synth tone that's layered in the outro for What's My Age Again. It adds so much mood to the ending section, and I always loved the final blooming of all the instruments swarming in reverb. I didn't know it as a kid, but I think this was my first desire for ambient music. I always enjoyed the more atmospheric interludes and final choruses and endings that Blink was doing. I was often frustrated that they weren't longer, but understood that it wouldn't have worked in this type of punk music. All the Small Things in Adam's song are more great examples of this. I absolutely loved the beautiful bridges and endings to those songs. As a young Blink-182 fan, of course I fell in love with Tom DeLonge's side project Boxcar Racer. I liked that the music was more serious and had a darker tone, and more importantly, found more instrumental breakdowns that were longer. The song And I has a great section with what sounds like a synthesizer coupled with awesome drumming and alternating hard-panned, palm-muted guitars. The and Tiny Voices was another favorite of mine. And then came Blink-182's self-titled album in 2003. I was just starting high school and played this album to death on my guitar. This was my first true introduction to post-folk music with tons of atmosphere, experimental instrumental sections, and synth textures. The song Asthenia has a long ambient intro with synths and guitars recorded through a failing Leslie speaker. And then I found out the band referred to the song Always as the 80s song, and this changed everything for me. The production itself was intentionally very 80s new wave, which included more audible synthesizer parts. They also asked Robert Smith of The Cure to sing on the song All of This, which of course led me to The Cure and similar bands like Joy Division, New Order, Echo and the Bunnymen, etc. Shortly after this time, I fell in love with the modern band Interpol. In the beginning, they were often compared to Joy Division because of Paul Banks's voice, but I read somewhere that they were more texturally similar to another wonderful 80s band that would become one of my favorites, the Chameleons. Towards the end of high school, I saw the movie Children of Men in theaters and was blown away by a scene where Clive Owen is traveling through the future United Kingdom with King Crimson's The Court of the Crimson King blasting through the theater speakers. I knew immediately that I had to figure out what the song was. Days later, my mom heard The Court of the Crimson King playing in our basement and asked if I had ever heard Emerson, Lake and Palmer. She took me upstairs and popped Trilogy into the receiver and played the title track through her floor-standing Klipsch speakers. At first I was a little underwhelmed by the piano ballad, but my mom insisted I just wait. And then of course, about 3 minutes in, the full band came in and the Moog synthesizers melted my face off. I listened to ELP nonstop for months after that day and did all kinds of research on the equipment used. After my metalhead friend found I was loving ELP, he introduced me to the band Opeth, who were big fans of prog rock and bands like Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I was skeptical at first, but soon fell in love with the atmosphere and heaviness of Opeth. A great example of this is the song Closure. They were mostly using very subtle synth pads and Mellotron as a prog metal band, but they're still one of my favorite bands to this day that wouldn't be the same without synths. Another huge moment was toward the end of high school and start of college. I don't even remember now how I first heard DJ Shadow, but I do remember being instantly blown away by the song Building Steam with a Grain of Salt. I played this song over and over again and couldn't get enough of the spliced up drum breakdown in the middle of the song, and the following section that reminded me of the Tony Hawk Pro Skater soundtrack. And then I discovered the song Stem Long Stem Transmission 2. This was my true introduction to ambient music. The whole album had this strange nostalgia that never was. I felt like I had heard the songs in my childhood but never actually had. Through this song alone, I discovered some of the most important synthesizer artists of my lifetime: Brian Eno, John Carpenter, Vangelis, and Boards of Canada. Talk for days about these artists, so I won't even get started. One day shortly after starting college in 2007, I was cruising around the streets of Liberty City in a stolen car in Grand Theft Auto 4, and the song Oxygen Part 4 came on the car's radio. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and couldn't believe I had never heard of Jean-Michel Jarre. The song had such an immediate calming and mysterious vibe that made me feel like I was in the video game. I still feel like I'm on vacation on another planet when I hear that song. Synthesizer pieces ever made. I think I'll end my Synthspirations on one of the most important film scores of my time, The Social Network. I honestly watch this movie 2 to 3 times per year and still haven't gotten sick of it. It's partially definitely because of Aaron Sorkin's screenplay and David Fincher's direction, but it's mostly because of Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross's insanely well done score. I love every moment of every track on this album. The synthesizer sounds they were able to capture here are just perfect. They buzz, drip, sparkle, and whine out of the speakers. They're electronic, but at the same time feel so very organic and full of emotion. The first time I ever experienced this playing a synthesizer was the Arturia Matrix Brute, which is why I will never get rid of that beautiful beast. I'm endlessly creatively inspired by all of the work by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, and especially this amazing score. I started experimenting with recording my own guitar-based music in 2007, and at some point in 2008 I got my hands on an early version of Arturia's V collection. At that point I had no idea what a synthesizer pad was, but I was using them very liberally in my rock, punk, experimental, and ambient compositions. Over the years I have acquired many software synths, and as far as hardware, I currently have an Arturia Matrix Brute, a Sequential Prophet 5 reissue desktop module, a Dreadbox Nymphs, a Yamaha Reface CS, and various electric and bass guitars and pedals. I must also mention my Eventide H3000D SE, which might as well be a synth. That's my synthesizer story. I hope you all enjoyed it.
Hi, I'm Tommy, and first of all, a big thank you to the Pro Synth Network for all the effort and the love you guys put into the show. Contributing with this video is a true pleasure. In the mid-80s, I was about 15 years old and I stumbled upon a small brochure explaining MIDI. It must be from the music store. Magazine's brochure is the only way to get informed back in the days. The idea that you could connect and communicate with devices. The introduction to sort of computer networks was back then very exciting to me. And maybe without realizing back then it was a pivot point in my life when it comes to career choices. Even today, a part of my job as a creative professional is learning and researching and connecting all kinds of technologies. And if I can, I add musical instruments to the playground to test all kinds of proof of concepts. So why not turn Synthspiration into an experiment? In this experiment, I want to try to make the MetaQuest 3 a little bit smarter and embed AI into the device. I will be using Unity and a bit of coding in C#, OpenAI API and the MetaQuest 3. When finished, I will show the VR headset record covers or record sleeves. I want the device to tell me what kind of synthesizers or drum machines are used, name producers and other famous artists they worked for, say something about the genre or time period in general. Can it be that smart? Here we go. Okay, let's start with Mantronix. We can see that producer Curtis Mantronix is mentioned. Also worked for artists like EPMD. The 808 is mentioned. Bassline is a notable track. The 303 should be mentioned in my opinion. That's what the track Bassline is all about. Yeah. So let's bring in the 303. What can you tell me about the 303? Analog bass synthesizer, most famous for acid house. And of course, Future is for sure known to be a pioneer in this genre. Fantastic repertoire. Moving on to a different genre. The Das Band, known for funk and R&B music, produced by Reggie Andrews and Ricky Smith. Also worked for the Temptations, but no specific instruments mentioned. Small fail. It's a little bit of a fail. Okay, moving on to Midnight Star. Let's see. That's a lot of text. R&B and funk genre are mentioned. Reggie Calloway and Vincent Calloway are the producers, who also worked for the Pointer Sisters. Yamaha DX7 is mentioned, and also the 808 is mentioned, and I believe that, but I'm sure many other machines and many other instruments could have been mentioned as well. Talking about the 808, let's see what he has to say about this. This machine is so iconic, should be easy. Happy to see that African Bambata and Soul Sonic Force are mentioned. Planet Rock really made me fall in love with the 808 sound. Yeah, fantastic. Fantastic record. Staying in the 80s with Madonna. That's a big fail. This is not True Blue. So yeah, from the start it's all reasoning in the wrong direction, so all names, everything mentioned is wrong. A complete fail. Okay, move on to the last one. Princess, produced by Stockake, Waterman and Rick Ashley and Kai Minogue, of course, are mentioned then. Seems easy. Fairlight CMI could be correct, but not convincing for me. A lot of other instruments could be and should be mentioned. So, to conclude, when it comes to talking about music culture, do not underestimate human beings. Shows again the value of initiatives like the Pro Synth Network. So much fun to listen to the stories of the guests in the show. I'm a fan, not always listening live, but I try to catch up within the week. Maybe we will meet someday in real life. Who knows? Bye.
Hi, all here from the Circuit Symphony, and these are my Synthspirations. So, when I first started thinking about doing this, loads of albums sort of came to mind, tracks, which are, fantastic. Some of them like Zuluk and all sorts of things like that. But I wanted to try and think what really, really caught my ear, or my ear, as we say in Wales. The earliest recollection of any electronic sound or electronic music at all. And being born in 1979, I was lucky enough to sort of have some really, really good music around me at the time. And, same as all of us, music, I think, entered our lives before we even knew it, And so the first one, believe it or not, is Elton John, Funeral for a Friend, 1974. And what I love about this was the opening track and the opening about 4 minutes. I think it's done on the ARP 2500, and I didn't just look that up on Wikipedia. And just the sound, the white noise, the wind, the mood it created, and then the way the brass came in, and the way, even back then, I loved the way those notes cut off. I don't know whether there's something to do with the envelopes, don't want to get too technical with it. And then the rest of the song was really sort of bittersweet, a really nice song, but just that snippet was the first one that caught me. And I've got a photograph of me, which is on the screen now somewhere, with my Fisher-Price record player that played real records, okay? Not this plastic stuff. It had real needle, and I remember just listening to it all the time, just that first couple of moments, all the time. Yeah, so that's the first one. And the second is sort of very similar. Again, it's from 1974, and it's 10cc's sheet music album, which I think is a fantastic album. But it was the beginning of Hotel. Very similar to Funeral for a Friend, where they just set that atmosphere with, I'm not sure what's using this one. I'd love to know if anyone knows. But it's just that bubbling, LFO envelope, distorted, whistling sound. Again, being a child, probably couldn't even speak at that point. I was just fascinated by how it made me feel. It just really captured me. It was brilliant. The third one, I mean, there's millions. Of course there's millions, but these are the ones that just planted the seed. And it's Vangelis, or as they say now, Vangelis. I used to work with somebody who was Greek, and when I said, have you heard of Vangelis? He laughed at me. So, Vangelis. And it's Abraham's theme. Again, at the beginning, just with those synthesizer sounds, the CS80 and the big reverb and the peacefulness of it all, I played this to death. Again, when I was a kid, still on my Fisher-Price record player. And I did have Nelly the Elephant as well, LP one, single ones, but that's a different story. Yeah, so moving on a little bit differently. The next one is got to be Jonah Louie. Stop at Calvary as well, But you'll always find me in the kitchen at parties. Just that string sound, that synth sound. And I think it was a Polymoog. I don't know. I'd love somebody to confirm that. But that's what caught me when it came to string synths. And even the Birdie song, come on. You know, there's some brilliant sort of ensemble string synths going on in there. Yeah, so those are the earliest things that sort of captured my mind. And then, you know, we're moving on then to Zulu Ethnicolor, you know, with all the voices and the articulation of the speech. And even though you don't know what they're saying, I know the John Lejar either, but it's that expression, that articulation. It was brilliant. That's what's always fascinated me, is using the human voice in some sort of way, sampled to make another sound. I just thought that is an extraordinary album. And it still is today, and it still sounds way ahead of its time. It's phenomenal, especially if you really stop and listen to Ethnicolor. It's amazing, absolutely amazing. So I could go on and on. My Goldfield, Foreign Affair, lovely riff on there. You know, I think a lot of us agree with all the sort of same things there, but these were the ones that maybe stop and think, I need to find out more about that. And you know, that's where I am today, sitting in the studio talking to you lot. So I hope you've enjoyed that. Only quick, short, sweet, but I just wanted to really go back to the beginning before I really started enjoying music, just the sound and what captured it. So enjoy. I don't know why I turned around like a news presenter then.